We live in communities, these shared geographic spaces where we shop, work, play, eat, sleep, and learn. How these communities are shaped, how they function, how they work, all of these decisions are made locally and affect our lives much more immediately and much more profoundly than national decisions. All across Connecticut, people are coming together and getting involved, contributing new ideas and creating solutions that build diverse, vibrant, thriving communities. Building civic engagement, at its core, it's really the most important factor in making communities work.
Hi, my name is Jamie Bianca, and I am a senior at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. I have been a Connecticut Civic Ambassador for about a year now, and I've been getting involved with community service ever since I was little. My brother is on the autism spectrum, so I really enjoyed working with organizations like Special Olympics and the Connecticut Challenger Leagues and Shepherd Meadows Therapeutic Riding Center to help children just like my brother. Being able to be involved in civic engagement is so important because what I realized is that it takes a team. And we all want to be leaders and we all want to take charge on certain projects. But it's really important that before we lead, we learn how to be a follower and we learn from people who have had other experiences and allow them to share their stories. And that's really important because, as Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said, the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. So I always remember that with all of the work that I do.
My name is Rashamel Jones. I am the former University of Connecticut national champion. I am currently the director at the Orchid Boys Club and Girls Club of Bridgeport, Connecticut. I became a civic ambassador for a few reasons. One, myself, I've come from a broken marriage. I was raised by a single father, and as a youngster out in the world, young children need responsible adults to care for them, to love them, to encourage them, and to empower them. And along my way, there were people, coaches, basketball coaches in my life that gave me those tools, that encouraged me, empowered me, and strengthened me, and told me that I can become whatever I chose and whatever I put my mind to. And growing up, I was blessed to have special individuals, special people in my life, and that is the only reason that I became a civic ambassador, and this is the reason why I am currently the program director here at the Orchid Boys Club and Girls Club, is strictly to empower, encourage, and to give our youth love.
Hi, my name is Robbie Hill, and I'm the Partnerships Coordinator for Desegregate Connecticut. We are a coalition of volunteers and over 60 nonprofits that's committed to passing statewide zoning reform legislation in service of equity, inclusive prosperity, and environmental sustainability. If you're considering becoming a civic ambassador yourself, I would tell you to do it, not just because you get to attend things like the Civic Ambassadors Summit, but because it gives you a wealth of knowledge and of expertise that you can use to aid your own advocacy efforts. And I think we all get into this work because we care about our communities and because we care about our towns and our cities and our state. And if you really care about making a difference, passing reforms, generating grassroots support, there's no better way to do it than by building new relationships with other civic ambassadors and with other leaders across your community.
Working together to strengthen communities. Become a civic ambassador today.
Greetings. I'm Martha McCoy, Executive Director of Everyday Democracy. On behalf of Everyday Democracy, the Secretary of the State's Office, and the Connecticut Civic Health Initiative, welcome. We are so pleased that you are here with us for the 4th Connecticut Civic Ambassador Summit and our very first virtual summit. Civic ambassadors are people who have made a commitment to work with others across the diversity of our communities and our state. When those of us who are civic ambassadors take the Civic Ambassadors Pledge, we pledge to work with others to make our state a place that is civically healthy. That means a state where everyone's voice and participation are honored and valued, where there are democratic spaces to listen to each other and work together across difference, and where public institutions honor and value everyone's voice. One of the key areas of Civic Ambassadors' efforts is being highlighted today, and that is to address racism and racial injustice. This is a job for all of us, for people of every age, every town and city, every walk of life, and every racial and ethnic background. Black, Indigenous, all people of color, and all white people have an essential role to play. White people have special responsibilities to deepen our understanding, our learning, our commitment, to understand the implications of systemic racism, and to do something to dismantle it. Today's summit will provide tools and inspiration to help you contribute to a racially equitable Connecticut. Whether you've been a civic ambassador for years, or you're just starting out, or you're just exploring it today, we hope that this summit will provide the inspiration and encouragement that will enable you to make a difference in our state. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Denise Merrill, our esteemed Secretary of the State, co-chair of the Civic Health Advisory Group, and Civic Ambassador. Denise?
In the community, because the other thing that we found was that the work really starts at the grassroots level. And that fits together with this notion that we should be asking people in, because that's where and how that is done. It is not done from the top down. It really is and has to be a whole community effort. So if we want people to be involved in their communities, if we want people to come out and vote and care about our democracy, we have to ask them in. And that is essentially what we're asking today, and what we have been trying to generate in the cities and towns in Connecticut. That idea that you want to improve your community and you want to be part of something, and other people want you there. I will leave it to Val and to Martha. Is Martha here today? I don't see your picture, but that doesn't mean much because I know there's lots of other people that I can't see. But they can explain how we came up with this idea of civic ambassadors. And it was generated in another state. There are other states doing these sorts of programs. But what has happened is we have now people in a number of communities throughout the state who are involved civically, who want to be that civic partner, reaching out to other folks in their areas and neighborhoods. And the idea of our event today, which we have now done, I don't know how many years now, Val, but quite a few years now, 2 or 3, 4 years, is to give people ways to do that, essentially, without making it complicated, making it too hard for people to be able to do it, because some of you have never done this before, perhaps. Some of you have been very active in your communities and maybe are looking for new ways to accomplish those goals. But I'll tell you, after the 2020 election and the year we have just seen, that job is more important than ever. And I think you all know, from my standpoint as an election official, as someone who is trying to oversee the 2020 election, we need people to be informed and involved, but also educated on what it means to be a citizen in this democracy and the importance of every vote. Between all the, and of course, recently, I don't have to elaborate on the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement, the women's movement, all the things that have emerged from the last few years in our public life. Make this really, it has attained a new importance. It's certainly in my mind. And I hope that today we'll be able to generate even more civic ambassadors, because I think this movement could spread and grow and be the beginnings of a movement at the grassroots level that can help us navigate what's going on in our country right now. I have to say, in Connecticut, we had a very positive election. It all worked out. We managed to get people the highest voter registration, the highest voter turnout ever. But when I say highest voter turnout and highest registration, we still have about 20 or 30% of folks who are not even registered to vote. When you realize that 95% or more probably of citizens in our state are voters, are eligible to vote. There are other states that are trying to make that process a lot more complicated. We don't have to do that. We should be the people trying to get to folks and encouraging them to participate. For me, that is the most important job we have right now. And especially since there are movements in other states and even here to some extent going in the opposite direction. So I will continue to fight on my front, which is the front of expanding the access to the ballot, expanding voting rights. And it's a very important job, but I almost think it's more important what you're about to do, because without that, people won't be out there even trying to register to vote, even trying to be a part of our society. So I know to some extent I'm looking around at the faces and I know I'm preaching to the choir to some extent, but that's the choir's job. We want everybody singing in tune. And so that's what I hope we will be able to do today, expand this idea of civic ambassadors and have it be one more tool in our toolbox on trying to get our society moving in the right direction. So thank you very much, all of you, for giving up part of your Saturday to come to something like this. I think it's terribly important, and I hope we can generate a lot of enthusiasm and interest at the local level.
Thank you for your leadership, Madam Secretary.
It's an honor to have you here. And we are going to present a video with welcoming remarks from the Connecticut Kid Governor, Reese Naughton. And she, as those of you who might know, she was elected in January as, I think, the 5th Kid Governor. And she's fantastic. She's doing a great campaign. And we're fortunate that she won't be able to join us today, but she did send us a welcome video.
Hello, everyone. I'm Connecticut's Kid Governor Reese Naughton. I'm a 5th grader at Oshana Elementary School in Southington. It is my honor to welcome you to today's Civic Ambassadors Summit. Thanks to Everyday Democracy and Secretary Merrill for inviting me today and for hosting this important event. Secretary Merrill was actually the one to swear me in as the Kid Governor, so I'd like to thank her for thinking of me. I'm here today to tell you about how I make a difference in our state. I ran for Kid Governor on a platform of improving mental health during the pandemic. My platform, Be Positive Pandemic Perseverance, has 3 points that 5th graders can do to make a difference on this problem in their own communities. The first point is to brighten the lives of nursing home residents by making cards and care packages that will make them smile. The second point is to share positive messages from and with other students during the pandemic who may need some positivity in their lives. I created a virtual community crate where we post positive messages that 5th graders have submitted, and will be coordinating a poster contest this spring. The last step of my platform is about getting outside and active. When you go outside and exercise, endorphins in your brain increase and make you more positive. We all need some positivity in our lives during this pandemic. As Kid Governor, I work alongside a cabinet of 6 other 5th graders from across our state. We work as a team and with the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House to achieve our platforms, because we all want to make a difference on issues we care about. Cabinet member Claire from Stonington ran on a platform of racism. Cora from Milford is working on her platform of climate change. Huda from Meriden focuses on her platform of body shaming. Miley from New Britain is working on her platform of racism. Nathan from Hartford also focuses on stopping racism with his platform. And finally, Samir from Hartford wants to help kids be ready for college. Everyday Democracy and Secretary Merrill asked me to become a civic ambassador, and I excitedly said yes. I think it is important for people to work together towards making Connecticut a better place. Everyone in the entire world has the power to make a difference, whether they are kids or adults. That That doesn't mean you have to fly like Superman or be the president or anything like that. It means that you are brave enough to step up and help someone else. As a civic ambassador, I will try to spend at least 1 hour per week empowering others. Even a simple act of kindness proves that everyone has the power to change the world. And the work you all do as civic ambassadors takes that even further and is such an inspiration. Thank you all for stepping up as civic ambassadors and for improving the civic health of our state. To learn more about me and my cabinet, visit the Connecticut's Kid Governor website, ct.kidgovernor.org. Thank you for listening and enjoy the summit.
That's a great message. And we want to thank, of course, Nathan Reese, the Kid Governor, for those wonderful welcoming remarks. So I will join Secretary Merrill and Martha in welcome all of you. My name is Valeriano Ramos. I'm Director of Strategic Alliances at Everyday Democracy. And I'm also the coordinator of the Connecticut Civic Health Project. And I want to join all of you here today. I'm very pleased to see so many of you who made it, so many civic ambassadors. I want to thank you for spending Saturday afternoon with us. I want to take this opportunity to thank our lead sponsors, of course, Everyday Democracy, the organization that I am proud to work for, and also our longstanding partner, Secretary of the State Denise Merrill, and the Office of the Secretary of State of Connecticut. I do want to also thank and acknowledge our funding sponsors. This summit is made possible thanks to a civic engagement grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. The foundation is among the leaders in the state's philanthropic community supporting civic engagement efforts to improve the quality of life in communities. So we want to thank the foundation for your support. The 2021 Connecticut Civic Ambassadors Summit is also made possible through Connecticut Humanities and the Why It Matters Civic and Electoral Participation Initiative administered by the Federation of State Humanities Councils and funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So we want to thank Connecticut Humanities and its funding partners. Connecticut Humanities has always supported the Connecticut Civic Ambassador Summits, and this year is no exception. So thank you again. Let me say that during the summit, speakers and panelists will be contributing themes and concepts drawn from humanities disciplines, which include history, literature, storytelling, philosophy, law, ethics, and others. These disciplines help us better understand who we are, our histories and experiences, and inform how we address civic engagement, organizing, and civic leadership to bring about equitable social change. So today we will learn about such important concepts and themes as racial equity and justice, community organizing, civic leadership and civic life, democracy, etc., through the lens of the humanities. Lastly, I want to thank the summit planning team, who are also members of the Connecticut Civic Health Advisory Group, led by Secretary Merrill and Martha McCoy. And some of them, many of them are here today. So welcome and thank you. Richard Frieder of Community Capacity Builders and also of Hartford Votes Voter Coalition. Sally Whipple, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Democracy Center. Stephen Armstrong, Social Studies Consultant with the Connecticut Department of Education. Jamie Daniel with the Connecticut Forum. Bernard Cavaller of Express Strategies. Valerie McPay, who is a Connecticut Civic Ambassador, and Matt Farley of Campus Compact. So to get us started, I want to introduce our opening panel, Racial Equity Through Civic Leadership and Community Organizing, moderated by Professor Bilal Dabir Sekou. Professor Sekou will share information about the structure of this panel and introduce our distinguished panelists. I am now privileged to introduce a good friend and an outstanding scholar, speaker, author, and panel moderator, Dr. Bilal Sekou. Bilal Dabir Sekou is an associate professor of political science in Hilliard College at the University of Hartford. His research interests are race and politics, urban politics and campaigns, elections, and voting behavior. Professor Sekou has published articles on social and political participation by African Americans and public attitudes towards quality and integrated education in Connecticut. Over the years, he has served on the boards of directors for a number of organizations working on democracy reforms and racial and economic justice. These include Northeast Action, Democracy Works, Connecticut Citizen Action Group, the Connecticut Center for a New Economy, and One Connecticut. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Connecticut Mirror and Open Communities Alliance. He is also the chair of the board of directors of Common Cause in Connecticut and a member of that organization's national governing board. Professor Seco has also been a panelist and moderator at numerous events, including the Connecticut Civic Health Project's town hall meetings, Hartford Votes Vota Coalition candidate forum events, and major conferences. He's a very busy man. He also teaches the full course load at the University of Hartford. I am very honored to welcome Professor Bilal Sekou, who will introduce Bilal.
Thanks a lot, Val. I hardly recognized that guy as you were reading about him. So, so thanks for all of that fluff you put in there that make me look really good. So, you know, I'm really excited about being here today and being a part of this conversation. I want to thank Everyday Democracy for inviting me to be a part of these kinds of events, and in particular to thank, you know, Val and Zoya for the hard work that they put in to sort of pull this together and get us engaged. I'm really looking forward to hearing our three speakers today, and I want to sort of talk very briefly because they are the stars of this moment. We're beginning this day by having a conversation with three outstanding civic leaders who are working, in my mind at least, on some of the most important and most challenging issues affecting communities across Connecticut, especially in our urban communities. And while this will be an important conversation about campaigns to move this work in different issue areas, I think it's important that we all be cognizant of how each speaker's work is actually connected to the work of the other speaker. And so if we really truly want to work for the betterment of our state and our nation, I think it's important for us to think about how these issues really intersect. The reality is that to the extent that affordable housing is built, it's often built in areas with high crime rates, health disparities, failing schools, and joblessness. And I think it's really difficult to solve any of these problems if we try to tackle them alone and not see how they are how they intersect. So I'm excited to hear these civic ambassadors who live, in my mind, the Civic Ambassador Pledge. These are folks who actually engage in action to improve the community. They carry forth the message that civic participation is a transformative experience. They engage in endeavors that actually work to strengthen Connecticut's civic health. And so now we get an opportunity for them to share their civic action work. So let me introduce the three speakers we have. The first one is Robbie Hill. Robbie is a Yale undergraduate who volunteers as a community organizer with Desegregate Connecticut, an organization founded by Sarah Bronin in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests last June 2020. Robbie works with other activists and organizers to correct decades of discriminatory housing policy through a series of statewide zoning reforms in Connecticut. Michelle Stewart Copes, a resident of hard-hitting New Britain, Connecticut, is the CEO of SEET Consultants LLC Systems for Education, Equity, and Transition, and a national consultant and trainer in system of care and cultural and linguistic competency coaching. She developed and managed the nation's first and highly successful wraparound effort within an inner city area focused on Puerto Rican and African-American neighbors in Hartford, Connecticut. And our third speaker will be Melvin J. Medina, served as the Public Policy and Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Connecticut between January 2014 until February 2021. There he led the organization's effort to create and maintain community engagement through education, member attainment, and general outreach. A proud Puerto Rican and resident of Waterbury, Connecticut, Melvin is passionate and knowledgeable about the issues that affect disadvantaged communities in the state. So again, I'm really excited to hear from these speakers. And so why don't we have them speak in the order that I introduced them. So why don't we start with Robbie Hill first?
Hi, thank you, Bilal, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm not sure, what my time allotment looks like, but if I have a little bit, I would love to share a few slides that talk about the work that we do at Desegregate Connecticut. So I can do that.
Probably about 10 minutes. So
10 minutes, perfect. Everyone should be able to see. Desegregate Connecticut, in short, we're a research, advocacy, and lobbying coalition, as Bilal said, founded by Professor Sarah Broden of UConn. And we consist of almost 70 different organizations across the state and across the country. And through them, we draft legislation and we refine proposals. And then we bring those to legislators and we lobby legislators and we engage with community members. We meet them generally where they are by going to community events and by speaking on local panels and webinars. And we also host our own events to talk about our proposals. We've had over 2,000 attendees at those. These are some of the groups that I work with as partnerships coordinator, housing advocates like Partnership for Strong Communities, statewide groups like the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, groups like the Connecticut Hispanic Democratic Caucus, and Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunities, CT Voices for Children, the Urban League, all groups committed to social justice and ones who have signed off on Desegregate CT's proposals and who are committed to eventually ending Connecticut's housing segregation through zoning reform first. A bit of background, any of you who've read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, it's a recently popularized novel, know that throughout the 20th century, the government created and maintained residential segregation through a series of explicitly racist policies, like redlining, which is on the cover of The Color of Law, or racial covenants that barred Black people from entrance into white suburbs. And as a result, Black people lost out on decades of access to the suburbs, which for white middle-class families is the primary means through which they acquire wealth, is in the appreciation of their home's equity. These policies were outlawed finally with 1968 with the passage of the Fair Housing Act, but in their place, towns have used something called exclusionary zoning to keep their communities segregated and to maintain their resources. Exclusionary zoning is a series of intentional land use practices that are designed to limit housing supply and to drive up housing prices. This usually involves blocking certain types of housing like multifamily housing or duplexes or triplexes, types of housing that are naturally more affordable by virtue of their size, and also by setting unreasonably high standards for development. This could be excessive minimum lot size requirements. Sometimes in Connecticut, you see upwards of 1, 2, 3, even 4 acres just for a single family home in a town, or it could be excessive minimum parking requirements. Some towns mandate that each single family home have 4 off-street parking spaces. These are all factors that contribute to price increase and eventually get passed down to home buyers and renters. There's a very easy way to understand exclusionary zoning, and that's that when you drive up home prices, you're driving out poor and middle income people from your communities. And as a result, wealthy towns are able to hoard resources like public education, parks, and stores from Black people and Hispanic people disproportionately who are less wealthy as a direct result of decades of explicitly racist housing policy in the 20th century. In Connecticut, we have it even worse as a state than most places across the country. The Bridgeport, Stamford, New Haven, and Hartford metro areas have the highest increases in income segregation since 1970. Fairfield County in the southwestern corridor is the most income segregated place in the country, and 70% of Connecticut's Black population lives in just 17 different municipalities out of 169. By pretty much every metric, any researcher worth their snuff estimates that Connecticut is one of the most segregated places in the country. And so it's out of this urgent need for action that Desegregate CT emerged. And we identify 3 principal justifications for zoning reform. And that's to increase our community's equity, to improve our state's economy, and to protect our state's environment. But today I'm going to focus specifically on that first reason, and that's equity. So first, I think we have to identify part of the problem, and that's that Connecticut has a severe lack of housing diversity. The image you're seeing is from the Desegregate Connecticut Zoning Atlas, where we actually mapped every single zoning code in the state of Connecticut to see what types of housing it allowed and with what requirements.
And we found that 90.5% of all zoned land in the state allows single family housing as of right. And that means without a special permit or review process. Contrast that with where multifamily housing is allowed, and the difference is incredibly stark. The purple is where multifamily housing is allowed, as it was for the single family. And this is true on only 2.2% of land. And it's almost exclusively concentrated in our cities of Hartford and New Haven, Bridgeport, Stamford, Waterbury. And so that means then that certain classes of people, typically Black people and Hispanic people, and always poor people, are confined into urban centers that lack the sort of resources to contribute to community success. So we have a problem that Connecticut isn't producing enough housing, and that again stems from our zoning codes. We are not allowing higher density housing. We're putting too many barriers in place to good development. So that's the problem that Desegregate CT identified, is that it's too limited and too homogeneous. And as a result, we have a series of inequitable outcomes. Educational access, for instance, in Fairfield County, it's 3.5 times more expensive to live in a town with a high-performing school district than one with a low-performing one. Again, public education is foundational to the success of our children and to our communities. And by shutting out poor and middle-income people from certain towns, we're also shutting them out from better schools. Public health, which I know we will address on this panel, there's almost a 16-year difference in life expectancy between Northeast Hartford, which is a poorer community with a high density housing, and West Hartford Center, which is a single family exclusive area. These discrepancies are true throughout the state, and often they're even true within a city. Where I live in New Haven, there is a 10-year difference in life expectancy between two adjacent neighborhoods. And that largely has to do with a long history of racist housing policy and zoning policies that have failed to correct that. And lastly, cost burdening. Housing cost burdening refers to spending 30% or more of your income on housing, and Black and Hispanic people across Connecticut have higher rates of cost burdening, and especially Black and Hispanic women. As I just discussed, the public health discrepancy between New Hallville and Prospect Hill and New Haven, you can see that there's a difference in the diversity of housing that's allowed. There's also differences in demographics between the two areas. New Hallville, where there is more multifamily housing, is almost 90% Black and less than 1% white. Prospect Hill, which is a richer area, is 35% white and 25% Black. And Prospect Hill has a greater than 10-year average life expectancy compared to New Hallville. Sorry. Educational inequity, as I was discussing before, the 10 towns with the highest performing school districts are severely overrepresented in terms of their white population and underrepresented in their Black and Hispanic population compared to Connecticut averages. And that is because we are concentrating poor people who, again, are disproportionately Black and Hispanic in our urban centers and not permitting them access to suburbs with good schools. So we need more housing and more variety, especially in our suburbs that have closed off and excluded access for decades. And that's where Desegregate CT came in, and we put forward a series of proposals that are now encapsulated in Senate Bill 1024, which is headed to the Senate floor. It was recently received an OLR report. And in that bill, we talked about things like passing accessory dwelling units, which are either attached or detached housing units that are secondary to a single family dwelling. We talked about eliminating the word character from public review processes, because that word has a long history or long racist connotation and is often used to keep people out because of the character of the people and not because of the architectural character of the neighborhood. And we talked about reducing parking mandates to help drive down prices in neighborhoods across the state. And we're lucky then that there's starting to be much greater recognition for these issues. President Biden has made inclusionary zoning and not exclusionary zoning a priority in his infrastructure plan. And in publications across the country, we're seeing greater recognition. We're also seeing that in the state, where 71% of people who spoke at the public hearing for SB 1024, the Desegregate CT legislation, spoke in favor, including 100% of young people. And then again, over 40 op-eds written in local publications in support of our platform. So this is where I'll end and ask for your help, right, as members of our community, as people who are engaged, and start by saying that if you text zoning to 313131, That will allow you to follow up with Desegregate CT's progress, and it will give you information about our bill and about ways that you can help. And the biggest ways that you can help are by meeting with legislators, which again, we make easy on our website at desegregatect.org/take-action. And again, by contacting Governor Lamont's office. He's vowed to take on housing segregation, and he has to have the backing and the political will to do it. And that's where we step in to make sure that they hear us. Other ideas, you can write op-eds or letters to the editors. You can organize rallies. You can publicize Desegregate CT's work on social media. And again, I'll reiterate, please go to our website, desegregatect.org/take-action, and absolutely text zoning to 313131. Thank you.
Wow, thanks a lot, Robbie. Great presentation. Very straightforward. Really appreciate that work. Why don't we go to our next speaker, which will be Michelle.
Thank you. To embrace the full impact of health disparities, I think we should first appreciate the definition of health from the World Health Association. And that is the state of complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. So that's what health equity would look like. And any negative experience in any one of these areas will impact our overall health. So I'm so glad, Bilal, that you've emphasized that we must consider the intersectionality of economic inequalities, housing inequalities, social inequalities, and racial inequalities to really understand the impact, the powerful impact of health inequalities. So I want us all to join the US YWCA, who on Thursday in a webinar sounded the alarm on our current condition and named racism as a public health crisis. Currently, people of color are 3 times more likely to get COVID-19 and 2 times more likely to die. And that's because of the pre-existing conditions that we have resulting from structural racism and the social determinants of health. And we named a lot of them already: the racist redlining and zoning policies, living in crowded, dilapidated housing, not able to social distance, breathing in mold and toxic air, the asthma that we all have, the scarce access to quality healthcare and healthy food. 25% of African Americans are not insured and living within poverty guidelines. And there's a lack of vaccination guidelines, vaccination sites, and primary care in impoverished areas. Dr. Aletha Maybach, who is the vice president of the American Medical Association, named racism as a public health crisis back in April of last year. She talked about the stress hormone cortisol and how it raised havoc in destroying our internal organs, and it lowers our white blood cell count, which is the reason why people of color die more and faster from the 5 chronic diseases: cancer, asthma, hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. Our Black babies die more than any other babies in this country, and we have a higher infant mortality rate than a lot of third world countries. Black women also die more in childbirth, and there's increasing evidence of maltreatment. This maltreatment goes back to slavery, goes back to 1619. You all remember the CDC, Center for Disease Control experiment with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which spanned over 40 years from 1932 to 1972 with 600 Black men. And they went with untreated syphilis because they just wanted to observe the painful symptoms and the results over that period of time, where there were 28 to 100 deaths, and syphilis passed down to 19 of children, and Bill Clinton only apologized in 1997 because of that. We also are aware of how 1/3 of the female population in Puerto Rico were sterilized. Birth control was tested without consent. That was from 1930 to 1970. And this was all merely to look at the reduction of poverty and unemployment. We go back to looking at, why are people dying faster, people of color faster and more so than whites? Back to the AIDS epidemic. Margaret Heckler with the Department of Health and Human Services did a minority report at that time, which is the reason why the Office of Minority Health was established in 1986. Congress commissioned the Institute of Medicine to do a study of health disparities to really find out why we had so much health disparities and so much more deaths with people of color. So over 100 studies were done, and they were valid studies, because they controlled for race, income, age, and insurance. So they saw and found and proved that implicit bias, prejudice, and discrimination in healthcare was the cause and results of all of these health inequities. You can see this in the book, Unequal Treatment. And now, that was written back in 2003, but now every 2 years, the National Healthcare Quality and Disparities Report is written and studied. That comes out of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and it's still proven prevalent and consistent that we have disparities in healthcare. When we saw the webinar with the USYWCA, we heard from Faith Crittenden, who is a pediatric resident at Yale New Haven Health, and she reported currently that she saw over 100 citations for health disparities related to racism. And on that same webinar, there was Nicole Austin Hillary, Executive Director with Human Health Watch. And she was looking at water rights. And she was looking at Detroit, where there were families where they cut off the water, where there was a higher incidence of COVID-19. So all of this confirms and exacerbates recent studies from the CDC to spotlight how racial ethnic disparities in recent COVID-19 hospitalizations and visits are still occurring. What was really troubling to me, I had saw a presentation by Dr. Linda Berry from UConn, and she showed a physician that was a female physician that was given testimony and how she was treated badly, sent home twice regarding her COVID-19 symptoms, and she eventually died because her symptoms were overlooked, underestimated, and ignored. So we must stop, address, and eliminate these disparities and consider this an urgent crisis right now. We must act right now before we lose hundreds of more lives. Martin Luther King said that out of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and it's the most inhumane. So we must all work to demand equity. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your advocacy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Wow. Two very, very good opening presentations. Melvin, the pressure is on right now for you up next.
All right, I got follow that up.
I'm looking forward to hearing this.
Hey, folks, everyone calls me Mel. Feel free to call me Mel. I'm happy to be with you all. Today, a bit of background from me. I'm a community organizer working at the ACLU. My undergrad is in history, and what I learned early on in my undergraduate studies and since later in my adult life is how important for people of color to know our history, because our history is often oral and less written down. And so what I really want to start with is a conversation about mass incarceration in Connecticut and what that history is. Because as we talk about solutions, especially when we're talking about equity, so much of those solutions need to be informed by the history of how we got here. And so I'll pick up on what was mentioned, particularly Robbie talking about housing segregation. In the 1960s, Connecticut was facing a variety of issues, housing segregation among them. But really what we were seeing happening in Connecticut between the 1940s and the 1960s was the phenomenon of white flight, encouraged by federal funding that built highways, that destroyed predominantly Black and Puerto Rican neighborhoods in Hartford, New Haven, et cetera. The dispersion of jobs that left cities and went to suburbs as America as a whole was being, there was a suburbanization happening. And also, obviously, as we all know, through the civil rights movement, an increase in racism and racial tensions resulting in not just organizing, but riots, famous riots in Hartford, because of the conditions that people were living in. And I think that what that means is the beginning of the mass incarceration story in Connecticut had three primary problems that were its foundation: divestment of cities and growing inequality as a result of racist policies. You had a public health crisis that was being that was on a rise. In 1969, then State Health Commissioner Franklin Foote, in a meeting at the state legislature, announced that there had been a drug addiction epidemic in Connecticut. And that's really important because that date, 1969, is going to relate to a date that I later referenced in 1994. But in 1969, what we knew about the drug addiction epidemic is that 72%, in that same meeting, state police presented a report. They had just modernized their computer system and were able to actually give data on all arrests statewide. In 1969, when we had a rising drug addiction epidemic, what we knew is that 72% of the arrests of people who were selling drugs in Connecticut were white men. What we also knew was that 73% of all drug arrests related to possession were white men. We knew that the majority of the type of arrest that people were getting arrested for was heroin and not marijuana. That was 1969. In 1971, then President Richard Nixon declares a war on drugs that we're all familiar with, launching multiple decades of a war on drugs that really has decimated Puerto Rican, Latinx in general, and Black communities as the focus, the central target of enforcement. We saw that early on in Connecticut. By 1972, the large majority of drug enforcement was happening in our cities, to the point that the percentages started to flip. So of arrests and of both selling and possession in Hartford, for example, 72% of the arrests were Black men or Latinx men. So the results were almost instantaneous. Now, mind you, like federal housing policy, like highway policy, the drug war was informed and funded through federal dollars that increased our policing infrastructure in terms of tactics, SWAT teams, drug narcotic teams, all that stuff. And it's important to note that so that's looming problem one. It's like this big mistake. We have a drug addiction issue that is really a public health crisis that we determine is now a criminal justice issue. And then we have a third problem in Connecticut, which is by the 1960s, Connecticut prisons were already overcrowding. Now, there wasn't many people in prisons. There was about 3,000 people at the time, but all of Connecticut's facilities were old and dated prior to the prior century. What ends up happening between 1969 and 1980 is the further escalation of a drug war that incarcerates Black men and Puerto Rican men in particular. One very interesting fact for those of you who have studied Puerto Rican migration is that many Puerto Ricans had actually, when they migrated to New York, had then left New York to come to Connecticut, primarily because New York in the 1980s was for many people feeling very dangerous. What they did not know actually is that Connecticut had a higher incarceration rate of Puerto Rican men than New York did. Now, what we find happening between the 1970s and the 1980s is the general uptick in drug arrests and drug enforcement. But what happens in the 1980s is a twofold problem. Connecticut prisons are overcrowding. Connecticut's getting sued. The conditions are terrible. And at the same time, the legislature starts to make choices about prevalent crime. And now all of you all are familiar with how we've treated drug use differently. If you used crack, it was an entirely different sentencing disparity than if you used cocaine, for example. The focus on marijuana use, that despite the fact that it's more prevalent among Black and Latinx communities than it is in white communities who often were using harder drugs, is another example. But what we found is that the state legislature started making decisions like shifting from a determinate to indeterminate sentencing structure, truth in sentencing laws by the 1980s, stricter parole requirements so that you had to complete 60% of your sentence and so forth. And what we see happening in the 1980s is not only a prison overcrowding problem, but that we're holding more people in Connecticut prisons for longer. And if in 1968, what we saw was the majority of people largely were white in Connecticut prisons, by 1982, we set what would become a historic and almost permanent disparity in our prisons, where 70+% of the people in Connecticut prisons were either Black or Latinx. That's a switch in 20 years that then is embedded and entrenched even to this day, even though we've gone through 10 years of decarceration. Now, the prison overcrowding crisis, in addition to the drug war, creates a problem for lawmakers who are trying to figure out how do we solve primarily the prison overcrowding crisis. And what they decided to do is invest more in policing and invest more in prisons. And so by the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Connecticut launches one of the most expensive prison expansion projects, over $1 billion. And that's not even including the yearly budget of the Department of Corrections that costs over $400 million. But they expand Connecticut prisons at the same time that our incarceration rate in the 1990s is now exceeding New York's. And in fact, since the 1975, Connecticut incarceration rates have always led within New England states. We have a history of incarcerating more people by proportion than, for example, Massachusetts, Vermont, and so forth. And so by the 1990s, we're in a moment of the Clinton crime bill, truth in sentencing laws that are predominantly impacting Black and Latinx communities. And the violence that those laws are trying to solve are really rooted in a poor decision dating back to the 1960s of tackling a drug addiction problem as a war on drugs that was exacerbated by a multi-billion-dollar investment in our policing, prosecutor, and criminal justice system. And so, as we begin thinking about equity in terms of how are these issues interrelated, as Robbie mentioned, Connecticut housing zoning laws essentially trapped people in cities, the very same cities that were divested of, and same very cities that did not benefit from economic policies that essentially were encouraging the suburbanization of Connecticut. These are the same cities that are facing drug addiction issues that are not being handled like a public health crisis, like we're now talking about in regards to the opioid crisis. But instead, we decided that we were going to use police and the criminal justice system to solve ultimately what are addiction issues. And then the prison overcrowding concern, that is kind of like this third layer in which the solution becomes a deeper and increased investment in more prisons that ultimately aren't solving these issues. And so as we begin this dialogue about where we go next, the important aspect to remember is that everything about mass incarceration in Connecticut is racialized. It was racialized at its inception. It is racialized today. And in 1994, to give you an example, this is now, in 1994, then the State Commissioner of Health, Sher Hosoko declared that Connecticut's last multi-decade drug policy was a complete failure. and that in fact, it was a field of nightmares that led to more policing, more prosecutors, and more prisons, and that we ultimately failed in our goal of ridding Connecticut of any addiction issues related to drugs. And so I think that's like a prep of a future conversation that we can all have about how are these issues interrelated and where does Connecticut go next. But I think that critical history of understanding how we got here is, I think, step one as we continue this dialogue.
Wow. So the three of you hit it out of the ballpark, as they say. Very, very good opening comments from each of you. I guess what I'd like to try to do now is to put you in dialogue with each other, and to try to perhaps deepen some of the, go into a deeper sort of discussion of some of the points that you made, but to see how they're sort of connected. So let me sort of start off, and I'll do this by pairing you. And so I want to actually start with Michelle and Robbie with the first question. And of course, Mel, feel free to jump in after they sort of talk about, or at least respond to my question. So we've talked a lot about the long history of housing discrimination, what Robbie talked about, and obviously we've talked a lot about public health and health equity. So I want to see how these two sort of relate. So we've got this long history of housing discrimination and restrictive zoning, right, which has created disparities in public health and educational outcomes. Talk more about how that has happened. And why don't we first start with Michelle, and then Robbie, you answer second. So Michelle, sort of talk about how these are connected, these two issues.
Well, what I get really upset about when I think about public health, I think about historically, but I also think about now when I live in New Britain. I do a lot of work in New Britain and also in Hartford, and I just see how people are living. I talked about breathing in the mold and asthma. And if you look at the stats, children and adults are 2 and 3 times more likely to go to the emergency room to deal with their asthma, which is just so awful. But that's just because of the lack of primary care, the lack of education around preventative health, the lack of being able to live the way we should be living in equity, and just living with roaches, rats, and mold, and just not being healthy and not being able to safely, social distance with COVID-19, and then not to have our rights to live as equal American citizens. It makes me angry, but it's because of historic zoning laws and the lack of adequate housing.
Yeah, I would reiterate everything Michelle said and say that I think when we're talking about public health and community health, we have to look beyond factors just like wealth. There are a number of different contributors to public health, like access to nutritious food, air quality, access to adequate housing, education within schools, mental health counseling. And these are all resources that people growing up in segregated, urban, economically deprived areas are denied, that contribute to things like lower life expectancy. Children in segregated urban areas have higher rates of asthma and respiratory disease. They lack access to public transportation and to green space. A very insightful article that was published in the Washington Post this past summer found that previously redlined communities within cities are at least almost often 8 degrees Fahrenheit hotter on average in the summer, because those communities were not planned to have green space like trees and parks that reduce community temperatures. And those are actual quantifiable numbers of deaths that occur because of heat stroke and health complications. And again, Michelle talked about housing conditions themselves. There are higher rates of vermin infestation, radon exposure, noise pollution, all in communities that for decades have suffered from blight and disinvestment. And so I think when we're talking about remedying public health, bringing average life expectancy in line and averaging it across racial groups and across ethnic groups, we have to talk about taking a multimodal integrative approach to public health. It cannot start and end with availability of healthcare or of food deserts. It has to start with where we live and with how we live.
Can I just invite Michelle, on this particular question to maybe dive a little bit deeper also around the educational impacts? Because I know this is an issue you care a great deal about.
The educational impact is so very, very important. We were doing a comparison in looking at Farmington, versus New Britain and Hartford. And the graduation rate is so much higher in suburban areas. And you wonder why. How is education funded? And it's based on property taxes and who owns all of the homes. If you look at Hartford, there's very little home ownership. So therefore, who is investing in education? New Britain, you all know, is at the bottom in Connecticut, and it just infuriates me. So when you look at public health, we have to look at how education is funded and the plight of our kids. This is our future. Where are we going with all of this?
Right. Thanks so much. And actually, Mel, let me sort of bring you in with a question as well, because we're quickly running out of time, and so I think we're a little bit behind schedule. So you talked a lot. Obviously there are housing challenges, right, that formerly incarcerated individuals face, especially finding access to affordable housing. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of challenge? And certainly, sure. Robbie can jump in as well as we sort of talk about this. Go ahead.
Sure. So, right off the bat, a large majority of housing authorities actually actively discriminate against people with a criminal record by not allowing them to access public housing programs. But let me paint a picture of the community of people that are being released from our Connecticut prisons. And it's important for everyone to understand that 95% of people, at least, who are in Connecticut prisons are coming back home. But we have a legal and regulatory structure that essentially makes them worse than second-class citizens. There are more than 500 legal barriers that formerly incarcerated people face that span the areas of housing, employment, certification, education. Those are the real barriers that people are stepping into in society when they leave Connecticut prison. So there's this phrase of, you do a crime, you do the time, but really in Connecticut, what we're talking about is you do the time, and then you do the time, and then you do the time. And you do that for the entirety of your life. CTEH and DOC compared their data, Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and they found that between 2016 and 2020, 3,500 people had entered the shelter system that had a DOC number. So essentially what we're doing in terms of criminal justice policy is that those 95% of people that are being released into Connecticut's communities, we're essentially saying, have at it, try your best. By the way, here are a bunch of barriers that are in your way. And we're essentially releasing people into homelessness, setting aside the fact that many of the people that are kind of circulating through the Department of Corrections often are people that have high needs, be it mental health issues, and so forth. But additionally, what I would add is, what we often talk about are incarcerated people as individuals and not consider the fact that incarcerated people are part of families, that many of the people in Connecticut's prisons and jails are moms, uncles, fathers, and children. And also that the impacts of the financial impact of incarceration, essentially making a decision to put someone in a cage for X number of years, essentially prevents a family from gaining any wealth. And in fact, sets that family behind. So when you ask what are the barriers, there are more than 500. They span employment, housing, and so forth. There are regulations that essentially ban formerly incarcerated people from reunifying with their families, like, for example, local housing authorities. And so what we're really talking about is Connecticut's approach to criminal justice is actually unsafe. Because if we wanted to create safe communities, we would want to release people into a world in which they can thrive. And so I would encourage everyone to reach out to the Smart Justice Campaign in Connecticut. They're fighting for two bills that are incredibly important. The first is Senate Bill 1019. It's a clean slate bill. It's an automatic erasure bill, so that after you've done your time and after a set number of years, your criminal record is immediately erased. Erasing that criminal record will give people the freedom to get the types of employment and housing that they need. And also House Bill 6475, which tries to undo discrimination as a whole for anyone that has ever been arrested or
has a conviction.
Okay, so I'm getting the cue from Val that we are actually out of time. So so I'm being encouraged to move you guys along. So I'm going to invite Val back. Oh, I see he jumped back, he popped back up on my screen. You know, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. I know there are a lot more questions that will carry over into the small group discussion. And so I saw some jumping in the chat. So once again, thank you. I've learned a lot, and I may need to call on you for my class. So, you know, keep your phone available for me.
Great, great. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Bilal, for this outstanding panel. Melvin and Michelle and Robbie, thank you. Really, really fantastic. A lot of information to digest. We're going to break everyone into 3 small groups that you have been pre-assigned to by your own preference. Some of you were not able to be assigned to a particular group, so we'll be randomly putting you in a group, and you'll have a chance to actually ask questions of those panelists that you are going to be speaking with in the small groups for the next 20 minutes or so. And there will be a facilitator that will be sort of guiding the conversation and also taking notes to do a report out later today. So at this point, Zoya is going to break you into small groups, and we'll be coming back together at 1:55, 1:56, and then I'll be announcing the break and the next event, which will be the keynote speaker. So enjoy the conversation in small groups.
For Bill 6662, looking at the reduction of 70% of health disparities and the creation of a statewide commission for racial equity in public health.
And that's very important. Thank you, Michelle, because obviously people who sit on those commissions, they include public health officials, but they also can include regular people who are concerned. And of course, the appointing authorities, the governor and you know, the legislative leaders do appoint some of the members of those commissions, but it's important that we have regular quote unquote people also serving in that commission. And also for all of you as civic ambassadors to advocate in support of that piece of legislation. And so we encourage you to do that. The next small group, I think, Eileen?
Yep, I can go next. So we had a lot of ideas flowing around in such a short amount of time, and I tried to record everything. But a few topics that we touched upon was basically my group talked about housing equity, and we talked about how tools like the Connecticut Zoning Atlas can help people visualize zoning codes, and it allows for people to think in a more critical way. We also touched upon hearing from those that have actually experienced homelessness themselves. So we can work to address these problems by learning from their experiences and apply what we learned to taking the next step forward. We talked about trying to educate as many people as we can on housing equity and kind of breaking it down to allow for more people to understand the harder concepts, and possibly incorporating these topics in early education or implement these concepts into learning curriculums in middle school or high school. And some challenges we included was that it's not really an approachable topic, and it can be hard for some people to really understand it. And it becomes pretty unclear to how zoning may contribute to segregation as a whole. So if any of my group members want to add on to that, this was kind of what I got out of it. But yeah.
Okay, anyone else? So Eileen, thank you so much. By the way, Eileen is a student at UConn. And, yes. And she's involved in the campus dialogues. She was part of the campus dialogues on race program. She coordinated some great dialogues that address issues of racism. So thank you, Eileen. And the next group is Richard.
Yes, hi. And our group was focusing on criminal justice. So Mel was the panelist who was with our group. Thank you, Mel. And like everyone else, we had very, very short time, and we could still be talking now and well into the afternoon. But we first had a little bit of general conversation, and a couple of points came up. One was whether the disabilities community is being included and their needs addressed in criminal justice reform. So we had some good conversation around that. Mel agreed that that is an issue that needs to be worked on. Another question that came up then was, is work being done in high schools around criminal justice reform? And Mel shared with us his thought that, as he did earlier when we were in one big group, that it's really important to know how we got here and where we came from. So that, yes, it is very important. And in fact, a lot of work is being done with students, high school and even younger, to help them understand how we got here, because education is key. In order to be able to do anything about it, you need to understand the history. We then briefly got into the question that the small groups were asked to focus on, which is, what strategies have you found useful in engaging people in your efforts to dismantle institutional racism? Again, in the context of criminal justice in particular. And Mel made the point that it's really important to work directly with the community and involve people with lived experience, because their input is critically important if any meaningful change is going to be accomplished, and they carry a lot of credibility. People tend to listen to them, state legislators, others. So that's a major point that he made with regard to what strategies work. And we then had a couple of our group members add that using processes and structures that embody equity, embody what we're talking about, is really important, so that we're kind of walking the walk and talking the talk, so to speak. Or is it the other way around? I don't know. But anyhow, we were just getting warmed up, and I know everybody had the same challenge, but that is pretty much what we covered. Any of our group members, would you like to add anything? Did I leave out anything in particular? Okay, I think that's it then.
Great, thank you, Richard. Eileen, also thank you, and Lauren. And as you probably noticed, there's a lot of common threads in the discussions that happen in the small groups and in the presentations by the panelists. And the panelists all highlighted how interconnected these issues are, and they are in turn interconnected with other issues. Issues having to do with housing policy, impact, of course, health, impact education, impact criminal justice because of excessive population density and so on. So we have to look at all these issues not in isolation from each other, but rather how they each impact each other and exacerbate the disparities and the outcomes especially for people of color in Connecticut. We are very fortunate to have with us today Mr. Rashad Hawkins. Rashad is an independent hip hop artist, producer, and grassroots community organizer. He started his organizing career working with Community Law in Action, developing and organizing youth around an initiative called the Just Kids Partnerships. As co-creator of the initiative, Rashad implemented the Just Kids grassroots campaign strategy to successfully change legislation and remove youth from adult jails. He developed the campaign's core alliance of youth leaders, which under his leadership was recognized with awards such as the John P. Cervantes Courage Award in 2011 and 2012, and the Open Society Institute Audacious Individuals Award in 2013. Notably, he co-chaired an alliance of over 30 organizations that stopped the construction of a proposed jail that would have housed youth in Baltimore. Simultaneously, he worked relentlessly on his music career while remaining completely independent, writing his own lyrics, producing his own instrumentals, marketing himself, and booking shows. Rashad believes strongly in the power of music and art to transform people and communities, and he calls himself an artivist, a combination of art and activist, right? So in March 2015, Rashad started his own company, Be More Awesome, Inc., which challenged him to strengthen his capacity for change as he saw his community's realities through a new lens. Under his leadership, Be More Awesome Inc. has hosted several events and performances, secured contracts to serve youth-focused organizations, built partnerships, co-planned 2 national conferences, and co-organized the first ever mayoral forum on arts and culture in Baltimore. So he has married both spheres of his life, arts, activism, and community organizing, and therefore he calls himself an activist. With programs such as the Youth Resiliency Institute's Long Nada Law Project and a documentary film he produced, Rashad has mobilized young artists throughout Baltimore to voice their perspectives on issues that impact their communities and promote change. He has been featured in the Baltimore Sun, Baltimore Social Innovation Journal, Baltimore Fishbowl, and several independent blogs and news outlets. Please join me in welcoming our 2021 Connecticut Civic Ambassadors Summit keynote speaker, Rashad Hawkins. Welcome, Rashad.
Thank you so much. That was such a generous introduction. I want to first off send you guys love from Baltimore. I love the work that you are doing. It's been amazing to hear from a lot of the speakers today because we were working on a lot of similar things. Thank you for the introduction, so I won't have to go too much into my background. We can just get straight into what I want to talk about today. Today, we're going to be focusing on activism, organizing, and systemic inequity, and how we work to address those things within our work. A lot of folks have touched on several things that's going to make my job a lot easier. So Be More Awesome Inc., our mission is to address systemic inequity through intersecting arts, activism, and entrepreneurship trainings and projects. So what that looks like is not only doing activism as far as legislative advocacy and changing policy and those type of things, but also empowering people in every way. So we're talking entrepreneurship, or at least having the skills to make you more competitive in the workforce or in your educational career. We're talking the arts, which is usually buried in behind the scenes of movement work, but is actually at the center of movement work. Everything we do, from our public awareness campaigns to even storytelling to get a point across and move people to action. So today, I'm actually in a way better mood with the organizing climate. I'm talking to you guys because the work that you are doing is phenomenal. Civic engagement is something that is missing from the landscape today as it popped in, I think, around like 2015, 2016. So you see a lot of actions, you see niche issues, but you don't really see on a mass scale traditional community organizing. And you don't see a lot of folks who are coming into the field having, yeah, we're gonna start on that slide, having that skill set or understanding what it is that we are doing. And I'm gonna explain all of that, not to be disrespectful to anyone, even though you guys are doing the work correctly. So we jump straight into the presentation, and we're just gonna go over some terms, the differences between some of the terms that are used interchangeably today. Advocacy. Advocacy is the act of arguing for a cause, supporting a defendant, right? So from lawyers to organizers, everyone advocates in some capacity. When I first got into the nonprofit field, I was a teenager. I was in high school. I was in an after-school program that kept me out of trouble and taught me advocacy skills. It was ran by lawyers. It was called Community Law in Action. That was the organization that ended up launching Just Kids. So I learned all of these things at a young age and how to use your voice, youth leadership. They were really pushing us to the forefront as leaders. So I want to go to the next slide. Organizing. So this is to arrange systematically for united action, empowering people to empower themselves and challenge the balance of power. So what I show, and I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with, is the picture of the little fish and the big fish. So it's pretty much on the first picture. Oh, there we go. That one. So on the first picture, it shows the big fish, which could symbolize anything from a landlord to big pharma, government, whatever. And the people who are not organized, they don't have as much money, they may be directly impacted by the issues themselves, people of color, women, those type of things. They are more vulnerable when they aren't organized, when they aren't empowered, when they aren't working as one, right, in a democracy. So in the second picture, it shows them being organized, and you see what happens with the big fish. That's what you want to do in any organizing situation, is challenge the balance of power. People have said it earlier. Those most impacted should be leading the charge. So if we can go to the next slide. So organizing versus activism, right? So organizing focuses on relationship building and like building a base, identifying leadership, those different type of things. Activism is the act of using that base, leveraging them, mobilizing them to engage in campaigns with specific goals that will then later impact change, right? So we can go to the next slide. Cool. So types of campaigns, we're looking at, I don't want to go to this. So we just want to look at the different types of campaigns are in this space, direct action. That is pretty much you going out there and then using your voice and mobilizing people to create a specific change that's going to impact the lives of folks tomorrow or today, right? So, and then you have the public awareness campaigns and the education campaigns. I want to stop right here and talk a little bit because I have to get this. This is why I'm a little bit annoyed with the climate. Any campaign you ever want to do, you're going to have to change public opinion. You're going to have to change, or you got to raise awareness of some sort, right? Because if you didn't, then it more than likely wouldn't be an issue, okay? So what happens is that is a part of a larger strategy that works towards goals that creates systemic change. What I see a lot of, especially today, and not to knock anyone, the Black Lives Matter or the All Lives Matter or all those different type of things, is that we are having a, there is a lot of public awareness campaigns happening. And a lot of times those campaigns are missing the organizing piece. So you folks do organizing, you know, like this is a culminating event from your organizing. So you know you're identifying specific people, you're educating people, you're training people, you're moving in unison, right? So with the way that organizing has happened today, sometimes it could be a little bit dangerous because these are real laws. This is our society. We all have to live under these things. The media is going to pick up certain stories. And those stories then influence the general population, and then it becomes a cycle, right? So we're gonna talk more about that later when we get into the influence of media and propaganda and how that plays into your campaign, whether it be a benefit or it's something that's working against you. We've seen it work against these campaigns a lot. So I would like to move to the next slide, please. We can, so from the next one. Well, I'm gonna keep going because you folks got the slides yourself. So next one is just the terms of note. We were just talking about public opinion, pretty much how the public feels about stuff, and raising awareness is pretty much public education. So the next slide with all the images is just what I talked about, the propaganda. So how did we actually get here? I'm so glad that folks filled in a lot of the gaps, but this fight, at least for me and for the space that I was in, it is a continuation of the civil rights movement, and it landed because of, I think it was the gentleman from the ACLU who spoke about the 80s. It landed in the criminal justice space because that is pretty much where slavery went. Okay, so we after slavery and the slaves were freed, you know, the South's economy was decimated. It's a documentary called Slavery by Another Name. Is also a book that you can watch or read that talks about this in great detail. Or 13th is on Netflix. Pretty much after slavery and the South's economy was decimated, they needed slaves, they needed free labor. So they linked on the prison system, and they had to justify the people that they were arresting. So that took the form of law changes, and it also took the form of propaganda. In the book and in the documentary, they both outline very nicely that Black people, right after slavery, we were looked at as trustworthy folks. Like we were the ones that were still taking care of the house of the white folks and all those different type of things, right? And then after they started to put out this propaganda and stuff, the view of Black people started to change, and that then justified the treatment of them and them being put away with these trumped up charges and long periods of time just so that they can help build the nation. So then after that, we fast forward all the way into the drug epidemic in the 80s, and then the fear of the super predator that created all these tough on crime laws that expanded some laws that included youth charges adults, and that's how I got into the criminal justice space. You got mandatory minimums, you got all these different type of things that pretty much just filled, and it's not all. So some people will tell you that it's all for profit. Well, the gentleman from the ACLU explained it the best. A lot of these things aren't even for-profit prisons. We're just in the middle of the culmination of years and years of racism, systemic and intentional, and all for money, right? And now we could go back further, but there's like videos and stuff I'm gonna send y'all that talks about Bacon's rebellion and how this division really started. And also there's Jane Elliott's eye experiment and different experiments that talk about superiority complex and really the mental of racism, the internalized racism, and that gets us to the health space, right? So before we get to the next slide, I want to just pause right here because I heard someone speak about a health equity bill. So we actually just passed one this session. Our session is from January to April. And with that, the idea for that came from Ohio. They were looking at making racism a public health crisis. And awesome idea, something I wanted to do since 2018, when we really started to peel back the layers of systemic inequity and also internalized racism, right? So we moved to the health space from the juvenile justice space because overall, once we stop looking at these niches, we are all connected. It's intersections everywhere. And the root of all of it is systemic inequity, period. It's health, it's poverty, it's all these different type of things. And a lot of times organizations get locked so much into an issue area that they get to a space where it's hard for them to create real change because they're too focused on their niche. And that was something we wanted to avoid. So we looked at inequity broadly. So because of that, we but we found it necessary to look at some sort of legislation that highlighted racism as a health concern. And then we got to the public health crisis. And I love what's happening in Connecticut. Anybody else that wants to try to do this, I would go for the commission route versus just making it a health crisis. Because when I presented it to our sponsor over the summer during the Floyd uprising, that was one of the things that she had pointed out from the Ohio bill with the 11 points, is that it was kind of just a resolution that didn't have any teeth. But with the health commission that's been put together, it has racism, addressing internal and systemic racism, all in the language of the bill. And then that commission also has advisory groups that can be made up of folks who are directly impacted from the community, people in organizations, those different type of things. And it has so many agency folks on there. And they are going to collect and create and exchange data, which then gives you the tools that you need to advocate. And they're more than likely are going to be advocating from the inside, but I wouldn't count on that because there's so many things that have happened. I know somebody brought up something from 2003. So many things that have happened without teeth or follow-up or oversight that just lays there until the next person comes and say, wow, we aren't doing this. So our bill is probably very similar to the Connecticut bill. So I think that's excellent work, and that's going to lead to actual change and equity over the long term. And we'll talk about why. Next slide. So that's just some campaigns that I wanted to highlight. Women's March, PETA, Our Equity is Awesome campaign, Truth. These are different types of campaigns with different components. Public awareness, changing public opinion, legislative advocacy, advocacy within the agencies, those different type of things. Go to the next slide. So young people, how do they fit into youth organizing? I've talked about this and I've also experienced it myself. Young people are they should be, especially those who are most impacted, they should be at the forefront and leading because they are the next generation, they are the most current. But we have seen that being done different ways. And the way that we did it was the most effective way and least harmful to the child in the issue. And that's another thing that I'm seeing a lot of today. We're going to talk about the models right now. So the first model that we see, we call it the parrot team model, like a parrot, like a bird, excuse my accent. So what that looks like is young people, like, you know, they're getting talking points. They just pretty much parroting what the older folks and the experts have laid out for them. Like, these are the issues. We just need a young face. Like, you go do that. That's extremely ineffective, right? So the second model, we called it the Lord of the Flies model. And that is when young people are pretty much like, as long as they engage and they're doing something, everybody's clapping, everything's okay. And that is one of the reasons, I know for a fact in Baltimore, because I know some of the organizations, that is one of the reasons why you're getting so many actions that don't necessarily have any strategy behind them. That and the media being a business and they want to get the most shock value things. But the model that does work is what you guys are doing and what we have done for years, is the youth adult partnership model. So that is when young people are put in positions of leadership, but they are also given the tools, the mentorship, the guidance from experts, and they are held accountable. Okay, so that is how you develop young leaders and organize correctly. Next slide. So we're gonna, this is my favorite part. We're gonna get into the actual strategy. I'm not sure who is familiar with Midwest Academy, but that is the holy grail for me when it comes to direct action campaigns. Okay, so we have used it. We've been successful in several campaigns, and this is just the outline. We're gonna go through each one separately. You first identify the issue. You become an expert on the issue. Those first two things are so important, and I see it missing so much today, right? So before you even start, you have to be correct, and it's not just broadly correct. Like, yes, we know racism is a problem. We know police are a problem, but what is a fix that is feasible and in the best interest of everybody? And that is what everyone's missing. That's why people don't win, or they win and excuse me, they win because of the media cycle and public opinion at the time, and then go back later, a few years later, excuse me, in a few years you go back and you're like, well, this was a horrible idea. You see it so much. And the reason is people weren't right when they started. So it's like, yes, racism is bad, but when you start to, like in Baltimore, the second uprising that just happened last year, the defund campaign never had any strength, because in 2015, when the riots happened, they signed the consent decree to then work on the Baltimore City Police Department, which means I think they have increased funding over the next few years so that they can address those issues. So it was never an option to defund. That's why the mayor kind of just threw them a bone. And that's what happens a lot when you don't have a strategy and you're not expert on your issue and you're not right. They'll just throw you a bone until it quiets down, and then they'll go back to business as usual, like cops, like canceling cops and stuff like that, the TV show. So those are the first 2 points. You identify the issue, you become an expert on the issue, make sure you're right, and then you identify your strategy, and all of these things are your strategy. You're setting goals, you're creating a resource pool, you're recruiting allies, you're identifying targets, using tactics, and working in media, which is a tactic, and then planning for success. That is just best practices. We can go to the next slide. So after you've identified your issue and you became an expert on the issue, which people, like, you've been sharing a lot of information earlier on different issue areas, like in depth. So I know you guys already know what you're doing as far as the research stuff, but if you don't, research, try to find relevant reports, try to talk to educators, try to talk to experts in the field, think tanks that exist just to think about things and analyze them and create reports. Talk to those folks, get those reports, and then learn. And then you also want to make sure that you're coupling that. So a lot of people stop there. Y'all was talking about that too. The grass top speech is never going to come from the top down. It's going to always be from the bottom up. So you need to get out into the communities, do your one-to-ones, all those different type of things, and actually organize, collect stories so that you can have the most correct solution. So once you do that, you're setting goals. You want to set long-term goals, intermediate goals, and short-term goals. Your long-term goals are usually far off, like we want to end the automatic charging of youth as adults. That is probably going to take some time, right? Your intermediate goals is like, what is a win now? What is something that actually create a change in people's lives today? And it also has to work towards your long-term goal. And then your short-term goal is what gets you to your intermediate goal, and then which then gets you to your long-term goal. And the short-term goal is almost always a number, right? So if our long-term goal was to stop the automatic charging of youth as adults, which we still ain't do. We got kids removed from adult jails, right? So they're still charged as adults, but they're held in juvenile facilities, and we're still fighting to get them out of like completely get rid of direct file and they won't be charged as adults like they did in New York and North Carolina. We did some work with what is it, Action for Children, like 2011, 2012, with their Raise the Age campaign down there in North Carolina. But yeah, if long-term was to stop the automatic charging of youth as adults, then our intermediate goals were to stop the construction of a jail that would house youth as adults, because the reason that they wanted to build that is, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Prison Rape Elimination Act from 2003, sight and sound separation, kids can't be in there with adults, period. So our genius folks here in Baltimore, they decided to build a new facility versus moving kids out of the adult jail. It was like, that can't happen. So we organized around that. And then we got that off the table. That was our intermediate goal. And our short-term goal to even get there was always a number. Like, you need this legislator, they're in this district. We need them to vote for this. They need to know that their people want them to vote for this. So you need to go in that community, you need to talk to their people, educate them for real, not like a trick or some blast that's just very thin, like I don't know, like this person is racist, fire this person, like all that type of stuff. Like, you want to go in there, talk to their people, get them to support, get your petition or your postcards or whatever that's directed to that target, which we'll talk about. And then that is your short-term goal. You're going to have several short-term goals. You want to keep on redoing them. So you got this petition, 100 was your short-term goal. This petition, 300 was your short-term goal. Facebook, like 100 likes, that was your short-term goal. That is always happening. And then you get to your intermediate goal, and then that would get you to your long-term goal. So our thinking with the removing kids from adult jails and putting them in juvenile was that one of the biggest pushbacks that we got was that you can't mix these kids. These kids are different. Y'all know science. Y'all know that's not smart. So we wanted to make the case that these kids could be with other kids because they may have more trauma, they may have more issues, but they are the same kids and their brains are developing the same. They may need more care. They may have an IEP, all these different type of things, but they are the same kids. Right, so you get them in there, you get your data where you're tracking them and showing them that they are able to be held in these facilities, and then later you come back to end the automatic charging of you as adults. So that's what a real intermediate goal looks like, and definitely works towards your long-term goal. But, and I'm gonna be real with you, in real life, these things happen as well. I ended up as the founder of Be More Awesome, going back into the juvenile facilities and teaching creative writing. And I had one of the most difficult classes I ever had in my life. And I was like, what is going, like, who are these people, right? And they was like, these are all the youth charges adults. These are all the youth charges adults. And I was like, okay, right? So that's, again, like, we were as correct as possible. And still, in practice, they need better counselors. They need better things inside the facility for the young people. And there's so many layers and so much bureaucracy that sometimes when you're talking to a legislator and they don't want to pass a bill, is because they already know that, right? But that is why it's very important to do oversight. You need to track, because I was able to help fix that. And you need to make sure that you do your research and you are the most correct before you even start, and then you set your goals and then you work towards them. Again, long-term, distance, intermediate works towards the long-term, short-term is always a number and works towards intermediate, which works towards the long-term. If you have these in slides, if that's confusing. Right, so you create your resource pool, and that's just identifying money, partner, space, those different type of things, all the different type of resources that you bring to the table. Money isn't the only resources. You also want to identify skills, those different type of things. So actually I'm not gonna use me, I'm gonna use Dice. Dice is an artist. He was an organizer with Just Kids, but he's also a battle rapper, right? So he comes in with this is why you do your one-to-one. So we're talking before he's even in Just Kids. He's like, oh, I battle rap, right? So I was like, oh, identifying leadership. So like, what you write your stuff? Like, yeah, like, okay. You perform it live? Like, yeah. Like, how often you mess up? Like, nah, you know how people be when they rap. I was like, all right, cool. That's a public speaker right there, okay? And then you just transfer those skills. That's what we are built on as an organization. So next slide. So the next slide is recruiting allies. And this is also the time you want to identify your opposition. These are groups that are similar to you, same issues or in the space of the same issues. You want to recruit those who are harmed by the problem and people who will benefit from the solution. And when you're identifying those folks, you also want to identify the people that will go against you. A lot of folks was not ready for the fraternal order of police with all of this defund stuff. I already know about the fraternal order of police because we did the jail stuff. They are well organized, they fund people, right? So you need to understand who you're going to be going up against. And if you're trying to stop a capital project, you're messing with people's money. Like you got so much stuff, but this is the stage when you do that. So next, we got identifying targets. We was just talking about that when it comes to setting goals, and this is very, very, very important. You have 2 layers of targets. It's always a person, it's never a body or group. So if you're at the legislature, you identified your specific committee, that committee is not your target. People on that committee are your target. And I heard somebody said either chair or vice chair. That's brilliant, because that is probably going to be the target. The chair is probably going to be the target, vice chair, and almost everybody else on that committee are going to be the secondary target. The primary target is the person that can give you what you want. They can just yes or no you right there. A lot of people are missing that. Like they be asking the wrong people. Like we need to ask the cops when you should be asking the mayor, right? Those different type of things. Person that can give you what you want, yes or no off top. That's the boss in most situations. Like if you wanted something done and be more awesome, you'll probably want to come talk to me before you talk to anybody else. You wanted something done at McDonald's, you can talk to the GM, which is better than talking to the manager or the crew. And if you can get to the owner, you're pretty much in there, right? So that's the primary target. The secondary target is the person who has power over the primary target. So that could be anybody with some sort of influence on the primary target. So if I'm going at the governor, lieutenant governor would probably be, but it's not just the lieutenant governor. You got to look at all of the people that may have influence on him. And we're not just talking voters. We're talking his funders, right? Or his or hers or their funders. We're talking wife. Like if I wanted to talk to Barack Obama and like I can get introduced to Michelle, it's likely I could probably meet Barack Obama, okay? So primary and secondary targets are very important because no matter what you're doing, as far as actions, your action should always have a target and your action should always be working towards a goal. So we go back to the petition or the postcard. That petition should be going to a specific person who is a target, right? So that target should be able to give you what you want. So everything is very strategic. Everything is done for a reason. And that's why some groups who follow this and are able to legitimize themselves and have credibility, they tend to win a lot more and create a lot more change. And they also are a lot more quiet because all you got to do is like 1 or 2 rallies. And next thing you know, you're going to be invited to a lot of meetings because you're the ones that can get them out of office and they don't really want that problem. So the next slide is the media. That's the same thing. I heard somebody said like 40 op-eds. That's incredible. That is a tactic. Work in the media. Okay, and you can do it yourself. You can use social. You can print stuff. All forms of media. And we know why that's important now because we talked about the influence of propaganda used negatively, right? So that's just the next slide you have for yourself. It outlines the different tactics that you can use. And just keeps going, community events, those type of events. And then we're going to jump all the way down to recruiting 101. If you can follow on the slide all the way down to recruiting 101 with the bar graph. Right there, cool. So when it comes to recruiting, this is the organizing piece, right? So it's the relationship building, the one-to-ones, those different type of things. But it is ways that you can do this, not quickly, but the most impactful way. So minimal wasted time, very directly targeted, working towards your goals, very high chance you're going to win if you did everything else before that I said. So cool. So you want to get the yes, and who would you be more likely to say yes to? Friends and family, or organization you support, organization or event that you care about, or just a complete stranger? Pretty sure you can answer these things, but the reason that I asked that in that slide is because this is how your network is broken down on levels of effectiveness, and this is how I work, right? So this is how over the last decade that we have been able to do work, not only in the organizing space, but also in the art space with little buzz, right? We did get some press here and there. We probably going to get more in the future, but this is complete grassroots. And the reason why is because we utilize best practices like this. So the top of your network is people who you know. These are people like family and friends, people you worship with. They care about you. My base is built on this, right? That's my foundation. So anytime that anything is going on, I know that I have these people, right? They care about you. They don't care what you're doing. Like you're their daughter, you're their friend, whatever. They're gonna say yes, right? Now I have to be specific. I'm directly impacted. I'm a person of color. I'm from the community, born and raised in Baltimore, like the Y of Baltimore. So that works for me, right? It's true, but it may not work for everybody. Okay. So the second level would be people you don't know personally, who you know care about the issue. So these are folks that are aligned with your organization or just your issue area. Then you have people that you don't know if they care, but they likely care about the issue. And this is folks in just like your space, right? So that's like if theoretically we all should care about this, but if I'm on juvenile justice, I don't know if the climate person cares about Black people, right? That's the issue we was talking about earlier. That's why we focus on equity. You guys are doing awesome, right? Those folks may or may not agree with you in your space. The likelihood of getting a yes goes down. And then you have the final level. These are people you don't know and people that like you don't know if they care about your issue. And these are randos. And that's when the rule of halves come into play. And it's a rough rule. That's like if you just pop up somewhere random and just start talking to people. Our rule used to be that if you wanted to talk to 50 people, if you want to pick 50 people to show up, you need to talk to 200 because only half of those people are even going to remember who you are. That's 100. And out of those people who remember who you are, only half of them are going to show up. Okay, cool. Next. Boom. So you want the yes. How could you say no to someone who respects your time, makes sense, has a plan, isn't asking for too much? Right. So I have in this, the next slide, and in your the package that you will get, it's outlined. It also has blank lines for you to fill in. When you're advocating or you're recruiting, like this is the outline that you want to use. It's straight to the point. Introduction, problem, solution, take action. Pretty simple. Introduction. Hi, my name is Rashad Hawkins. I'm the founder of Be More Awesome Inc. We focus on and utilize intersecting arts, activism, entrepreneurship trainings and projects to address systemic inequity. Those type of things, or like whatever you do, whatever your introduction is. The problem, you want to lay it out really, really clearly. Right now, there's growing inequity in the United States because of straight to the point, maybe throw in a fact, a number in there, X percentage, depends who you're talking to. Clearly outline the solution. That's the problem too. People don't, and it's actually working. Like people don't clearly outline the solution to get us from this point to this point, right? Clearly outlining the solution is a straight up plan that shows folks that with this specific change, it is going to make things different for the better in their lives or the lives of the impacted population that we're trying to serve. Okay, so that looks like is we want to get this jail off the table, redirect the money to education. Then we want to change the law so that youth on charges adults, and this is why, right? That's clearly outlined the solution. And then to take action, that is how they are, the step that they take right now is going to work towards that solution, works towards your goal. So when you take action, you're like, we need you to sign this petition. The reason that you need to sign this petition is because delegate blah, 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 really cares about their constituents. They need to know that their constituents care about this. Our bill is in committee right now. Once you sign this, we'll give it to them. They'll know that you want to see this change, and that will lead to it being changed. Pretty simple. Not like that, like I'm freestyling right now. So the last one is, how are you saying things? Okay, so if you want the yes, how could you say no to someone that is confident, sound like they know what they're talking about, is assertive but respectful and likable, just like me. So these are the things. You don't want to apologize. You don't want to whisper. You also don't want to yell. I'm kind of yelling a little bit. You might want to turn it down just a little bit, but somewhere around this tone and frequency is what you want. You want to be natural, which I'm doing. I am using a lot of ums, but like it's been a decade. I'm sorry if you guys get triggered by that. You want to use strong language, and you want to end on a down tone. That's kind of funny. So the weak language you want to avoid, and I can't stress this enough. This is psychology. Maybe trying, asking, possibly, okay, we understand, basically, hoping, probably, perhaps, we think, can't, won't, and never. All get it out of your language when organizing. The strong language you want to use is working, winning, our strongest partners are, pressuring, crucial, vital, fighting, demanding. Can you match that? That's for donations. Exactly, critical, urgent, and necessary. Boom. So we want to talk a little bit about the Equity is Awesome campaign, and I touched on our bill earlier and how it ties in. So pretty much I'm just talking about the Equity is Awesome campaign. Pretty much when we first started, we wasn't going to do any hands-on organizing because we already did it. We wanted to train the next wave. We wanted to our programming to create the next organizers and folks to pick the issues that they want to pick informed, right? And skilled. We didn't want to just bring people in and like utilize their stories and like all those. We already done that. We wanted to evolve and do something that's more correct. I just saw a question. I'm sorry, I haven't been really reading questions. Yeah. So yeah, like when we first started, the reason that we felt that this was the ideal model was not only just the textbook expertise, but we found that opportunity youth, ages 16 to 24, I want to say, those are the folks that end up in the system a lot. These folks are usually disenfranchised. They are usually out of work, out of school, all those different type of things. These folks are many times interested in the arts, whether it be rap, hip hop. Like I can tell you straight up, like we've already done the research. A lot of people in the hood want to, well now some of them want to be activists, but a lot of people in the hood want to be rappers, singers, athletes, those different type of things. Now, the era I came up in, they would tell you that like, nope, you need something sustainable. You got to go get in depth in college and you have to do all these different type of things. And I felt that was discouraging. And I know that discourages the young folks because I lived in it and they're telling me, but this is something that they really want to do. And if you use that as a hook and then teach the transferable skills, because they are transferable, you're going to need an email list for organizing, starting a business. And if you're an artist and you want to promote your mixtape or whatever, get people to buy things, right? So we started to look at the hook that brought them in, which was the arts, and then how to teach them the skills that are necessary to be empowered citizens, to be active in the civics period, and also give them the skills to, if they want to become entrepreneurs, and they're going to need that skill for music anyway. Everybody isn't going to end up with Grammys. Everybody is going to end up completely living off of music, but everybody can have a real shot. And if you teach those skills, just like they taught me activism, and they thought that I was going to go to college and use this to get a poli-sci degree or something like that. You never know where they're going to end up if you can bring them in the first place, and then utilize their interests to teach them what they need to know to be independent, empowered, and engaged. That was why we started Be Awesome Inc., and that is why we wasn't going to be involved in direct action at first. Then in 2017, we were approached by the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund out of the consent decree that looked at school police and uses of force. And what they wanted to do was create a school police policy that would move school police from uses of force to de-escalation. So, and then we had veterans who helped found this organization, and then we have our young people, K9, all those different type of folks. We brought in, because we was ready to go, because we was already teaching it. And then we got engaged in that, and next thing you know, it was a snowball effect. It was like, now we want to work on this, and work on that. And then we're back in the process and expanded that arm of our organization. Cool. So I want to make sure there's some data in there, but I think that we pretty much got through everything. Yeah, the data and stuff in there, like you guys pretty much know, is talking about racial threat, a lot of pain and welch in there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, what is the name of that report that looks at inequity? I'm gonna send it, but it's a report that looks at the achievement gap. And I think it's from, had to be 2012 or 2013. That's a lot, yes. has a lot of information in there that talks about the direct line from poverty and inequity to a lot of the other issues as far as education, even stress and mental health in parents. So that is what I had to speak to you guys about today. Yes. And I open the floor up for questions.
Thank you, Rashad.
I can read out some of the questions that we have in the chat. Cool. So looking here, so someone from Health Info Specialist is asking, is there a difference in presenting your Ask intro as a youth versus adult that you've attempted or suggested and proven useful?
If I was, let me think. Depends on what you're working on. I can definitely tell you that it really depends on what you're working on. A lot of times your youth is working to your advantage, and sometimes it could be a disadvantage depending, again, on what you're working on, who you're talking to. Some people know that they can't look bad being disrespectful to kids or like not talking to kids or taking a meeting with kids. Some people generally want to support the young folks. And some people don't care, and this is legislators, about folks until they're 18 because of the voting piece. So it really depends on who you're talking to and what you're trying to do. But in the communities, I would definitely hide behind being young. I would just not hide behind it, but I would lead with being young because they would be more open to speaking with you. And that has a lot to do with a lot of things that we talk about and a tense, anxious, traumatized feeling in certain neighborhoods that are directly impacted, who may not like people just walking up to them and talking to them.
All right, if you have any other questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat, or you can just go ahead and ask directly. So we have a question. How have you engaged white folks to be a part of your campaign?
Oh, so my career was, so I'll be honest with you. I hope nobody from Black Lives Matter is here, but I'm not a supporter of Black Lives Matter. I support what they're doing theoretically. But again, our campaign is called Equity is Awesome because of marketing and also because of how the system works, right? So we would have known that the FOP and their sympathizers would probably, and because of the mental of racism, the superiority complexes, and the fact that none of that is being addressed, is like folks don't understand that they are legitimately talking to a brick wall in a lot of cases, right? So we have never been an exclusively Black situation, but the fact that we do the work correctly leads to people of color and women having preference because their needs are more urgent, and also them being at the forefront and them guiding a lot more of the changes and things that we take on because they have expertise from experience, which is an actual thing. But my career was pretty much started by white people. Laura Furr, she was with Cities United for a while. She has her own company. She was at Community Law in Action. She was one of my mentors, one of the people that helped keep me out of trouble. She the one that Terry was the founder of that. He was a lawyer from University of Maryland. Both of them are white. He came from Ohio. They were the ones that was like in 98, starting in 98. I came in like 2005, 2006. I was like, we just want to get these folks and teach them how to fix the problems themselves at a young age, right? So Laura brought me in as Terry started the organization. Laura brought me in on staff, and Laura's on my advisory board right now. Yeah, I mean, like I've always been somewhat conscious because I'm from the streets, like of people trying to manipulate you and stuff like that. So I've stayed clear of different organizations that use those models of the Puritan model, tokenism, like all those different type of things. But yeah, I can't talk about other people's experiences, right? So some people legitimately have had bad experiences with white organizations. Like that's your experience. I understand that. But for me, we do the work correctly, which means those directly impacted are at the forefront. But we are about making a more just society. And we understand that that society is also under systems like a democracy, right? So it doesn't make any, I'm an independent voter too. I want to open up the state. It doesn't make any sense to have certain divisions when they aren't necessary, because it could come back and bite you. It doesn't make any strategy sense. So they're there, but people of color are leading.
Right. And then do you have any tips or suggestions for engaging and empowering even younger kids, maybe those who are in elementary and middle school? And how do you help that age group find their voices and their passions?
That is a tough demographic. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I focus more so, I haven't worked with, well, my son, I haven't worked with, it's been wow. But what we did find was that since they are kids, like you have to deal with, no problem, Doris, you have to deal with adolescent brain development. You have to deal with all the different things that are just children, right? So one, I would say be conscious of that as much as possible, become an expert on what you're doing, and then you're able to build, just like I did Be More Awesome, your situation around the young people. I don't work with that age demographic, but I have a little bit, and they are really tough to engage in direct action campaigns. But the art projects, we have a video where we taught, and they understood this stuff, where we taught the influence of media, propaganda, those different type of things, like what the media is doing that impacts your brain. And then we gave them a project where they pick an issue from, I think, their school, and then they shoot a commercial on it. And like one of them picked, I think, like school lunches, and the other one picked the heat. These were real issues. And then they had only a few minutes to create a skit. And I'm gonna send y'all that video. And they like created like legitimate commercials. I was like, oh, so you have to find like what they're good at, what they're interested in, and also work around the realities that are them.
Great. And then last question, just to wrap up, do you think progress is accelerating or slowing now?
I think that we're at a juncture point, like at a crossroads or something like that, where the work has been happening successfully, very low key, but it has never had this much attention. Never been this big, so there's a lot of opportunity. But because of the way that it got big, it presents some challenges. So I've like this Supreme Court stuff. What was it, juvenile life or something like that? Like they just ruled on. We've been past this, even at that. And I have to research that, make sure I'm not speaking incorrectly. But little stuff like that, and you start to see little bills coming out, like Minnesota. They're trying to expand collateral consequences. And there's no mistake that that is a place where a lot of this stuff is happening at. And then they even actually tried the less police stuff. It was no plan. So it didn't turn out well. So yeah, that's why we ran and did the health equity bill when we saw everybody speeding up reopening. Because I see more questions. Because we saw that this could go in several directions, especially in Baltimore. And that did definitely lead to reopening, even though it wasn't possible to defund police. Somebody knocked down the Christopher Columbus statue and was like, okay. And then the governor used the fact that it was thousands of people out in the street, and it's ridiculous that Baltimore wouldn't reopen, and then we reopened, and COVID, and back to inequity and health. Yes.
All right, well, I'm afraid that's all the time that we have, so I apologize if we weren't able to get to your question. Yeah. But Rashad, thank you so much. That was a brilliant presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rashad. Really wonderful, really wonderful. And we do have the questions in the chat room, and Zoya will be collecting those, of course. We are now going to break into 3 small groups, and you'll be met there by a facilitator who will be engaging you on questions related to how do you do this organizing around, in community, around racial equity goals, addressing disparities, and how do you bring different voices in and different people into that work. So we'll break into 3 groups, and then after that, we will take a 5-minute break before we move on to the training. Thank you. So we're going to ask for the moderators to share with Zoya your comments or discussion in your groups, and then we'll we'll do a 5-minute break. But let's wrap up this by sharing notes and takeaways.
Yes, Neha, if you wanna start. So to the other moderators, if you would like to send me the full copy of your notes, but just share one key takeaway that you found in your groups.
Okay. Oh, I should have probably shared it then. But yeah, one key takeaway that our group really talked about was getting more representation on boards, like nonprofit boards. We don't see any diversity, and so having more representation on those boards, and just in general, more involvement, even in the town level as well. Getting more representation in our different committees, housing committees, and if you know someone who is wanting to be more actively involved in some sort of commission, like LGBTQ commission, then, and that's their strong point, then make sure you share the resources and let people know.
And you can also share, if you're interested in serving on a board, in the state board or commission, go to your state legislator, your state representative or state senator, and let them know. You can bring your resume or a statement that says why you care about, why you would want to serve in that commission.
All right, and Cameron, do you want to share what you and your group discussed?
Yeah, so I think a big thing, the biggest takeaway was that we just talked about it right here at the end, was that it's not just about people being interested in the issues, but also making them feel comfortable when they come together with people in the community, and making sure that there's connection and that people, not forgetting that we're humans and we're not just there to talk with the issues, but making sure that it's both, and that we care about the issues, but are also comfortable with one another when we're doing this work. And then I know there was a bit of talk about burnout and trying to keep people motivated when they're organizing, because it can get hard, especially on projects that go on for long periods of times, and just making sure that people are encouraged by the good results, and also appreciating the small wins that come your way and not just waiting for bigger wins to happen.
Great, thank you. And then I'll report out from my group. We had a lot of great conversation about different topics. But one thing that did come up was around technology and organizing through Zoom or online, and how it has benefited several conversations, and in terms of people being available and being accessible, both for time and convenience, but also recognizing the drawbacks that are associated with it. So whether that be, Zoom fatigue, whether that be recognizing the privilege of having access to internet and being able to come online for these kinds of events. And so moving forward, when we think about a post-COVID society, really connecting the best parts of being in person and organizing online, and using these resources that we've kind of come to know very well to our advantage. But thank you everyone for participating in that small group, and we will get all of the notes from the small groups and have that sent out to you so that you have that for your information. But yeah, so I think we're ready to move into a small 5-minute break. We'll have some slides going, so please feel free to watch those.
Okay, welcome back everyone. And that was really wonderful small group conversations, some great takeaways. And at this point, we're going to move into the community organizing training with my colleague and trainer at Everyday Democracy, Matthew Sagacity Walker. So we want to welcome Sagacity. And let me just preface that by saying that community organizing requires a wide range of skills and knowledge to bring about community change. We heard our keynote speaker talk about how you have to be thoughtful about whatever campaigns you're doing, if it's an issue organizing, or if you're doing organizing in the neighborhood for dialogue conversations or for addressing particular issues in the community. You have to be really thoughtful, and you have to bring all the skills and the knowledge that exists within the community. And that's part of infusing a racial equity lens, in fact, because you are bringing people who are most familiar with the impact that racism has on them. And so I'm very, very pleased to introduce and welcome my esteemed colleague and a good friend, Matthew Sagacity Walker. Matthew.
All right. Hello. Thank you for the introduction, Val. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for participating. So I will begin. Oh, hey, Cameron, I haven't seen you in a long time. I will begin by starting out and letting you know that my 2-year-old is running about the house right now. So if you hear somebody yelling and screaming, that is nothing bad happening. It's just my toddler who's upset at me right now because I have to leave him alone for a little bit. So today, what I wanted to talk about a little bit was community organizing from the dialogue to change standpoint. And that's pretty much what Everyday Democracy likes to use in terms of the way that we look at community organizing work and how we like to operate as an organization. And when we do our workshops and trainings with communities, that's the model that and the approach that we use when we're doing this work. Some of it, it is going to overlap a little bit with what Rashad was talking about. So I'm just going to go ahead and begin to share my screen, and we'll begin with the presentation. I do want to be very clear, though, that if at any point you have any questions, comments, whatever have you, I would like this to be as interactive as possible. So I do appreciate a good conversation. I'll try to get a lot of information in there, but I also want you all to have a chance to speak, and I'll try to give you all some time to speak with one another at the end of this. So very quickly for context, Everyday Democracy does think about the work that we do in terms of making sure that all voices are valued, and we're making sure that participation and racial equity become a permanent part of the way we do our work, whether it's local, state, or national. We really are all about people getting their voices out there, getting the voices of everyday people involved in the changes that can occur and happen at the community level. So what I want to do really quickly is check in with you all. That's what I want to do first. And then I'm going to go through a presentation about the dialogue to change approach that Everyday Democracy likes to use. And then have an exercise about developing talking points. So one of the things that Rashad had talked about was when you are going to be working with somebody or partnering with somebody, how do you target people and what is the conversation like? You talked about having an introduction, making an ask and things of that nature. So I do want to give folks a bit of time to do that. And then I want to hopefully, if we have time, debrief and have a conversation with one another, sort of troubleshoot ideas and workshop ideas with one another as a small group. Any questions or comments before we get going? All right, and just so we know, when I am sharing my screen, I'm not able to actually see the chat box. So if you have a question or a comment or whatever, just jump in and interrupt me. If I'm going on and it seems like I'm talking too much, you don't jump in, do it like double dutch and just jump in. So how have folks seen issues addressed in their community in the past? If there's something going on, as a civic ambassador, how do you ordinarily address community issues? And please, again, just unmute yourself and throw out your ideas.
One of the worst ways I've seen issues addressed in my community is for people to jump on social media and just start complaining. Okay. And it's very hard to change the conversation to something that's constructive when somebody just wants to spew negativity.
Because, and if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is in terms of using social media, usually it's about spreading some sort of negativity, or it's more vitriol and not necessarily in terms of building. It's more of tearing down.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I see Lion Roland. The hand up.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I was going to put my hand down too. Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Lion Roland. I'm a president of the New London Lions Club currently. How I address some of the needs on some of the issues is I use data, as in demographics and things that are troubling the community, and try to build civic projects around those needs of the community, and especially the ones of the people that I'm serving. So that was like some of the ways that I go about some of those things per se, and how I would go about addressing some of the issues in the community. Like, for example, in New London, there's a high diabetes rate. So therefore, I want to build up awareness on diabetes awareness to actually get the ball rolling, to get people actually invested in things that are concerning them. A lot of people don't have those privileges that was awarded to other communities. So by opening up activities that's in the interest of them, solely to them, is a start in the right direction for them to actually think in their own direction and actually gravitate to other activities outside of the world of civics. So like, that's just how I would approach it as a civic leader, respectfully, and what I have done too as well.
Okay, great. And what you just presented too as your option and how you deal with it sort of relates to the dialogue change approach everyday democracy likes to use. So it's sort of related to the social media thing, but we try to do it in terms of building community versus tearing down, and understand that we could always talk about the negative, but how do we use the negative as an entry point to building into something positive? I can take
that's also
more. Oh, yes. Okay.
Also, wait, I wanted to build upon that. I'm sorry. Also, we also focus on what they call community engagement, which means that we're engaging with the community on their issues and problems. So therefore, if like, I know that there's certain activities that I would like to get my club to get more involved with, be more visible with the community, and actually be more visible, because that was some of the issues that we had, which resulted in us aging out per se, because we're not actually, and that is a community issue because this is a community club. So we need to be approaching the community as such in that manner, by community engagement, finding out what's organically what people are doing in the community and try to help them and stuff of that nature. I think that's a more of approach that I think it's more effective. Also, it's a more of a way where you can get buy-in with the community on a more of an equitable standard. So that's some of the things I've done in my work.
Thank you for sharing. I could take one last comment about how issues are typically addressed in your community, or how you have personally.
So seriously, one thing I've attended at least a couple of town hall meetings, in my town here, have been in the past, not so much recently, but people tend to go there and they start yelling at the mayor usually, or the town council or whatever. And then you see the politicians getting defensive, and sometimes they have to escort people out, and these people end up leaving the place more frustrated. Only those who are more vocal, their voices are heard because they yell, or they're already well known to be the sort of the loudmouth. And so, that doesn't always work, but that's one example.
Yeah, it's definitely town hall. All right. Okay. So thank you for those. And I'm going to talk a little bit about town hall as well. So really quickly, I do want to talk about some of the ways when there are changes that are going to take place in the community. These are some of the common ways they come up, right? Usually it's a top down, folks in the office coming up to a decision saying, Hartford needs a new baseball stadium, and this is what we're going to do. And they do what they need to do to make it happen. And boom, now we have a baseball stadium downtown that all the Hartford residents love to go to. And then There's another way, which is from the bottom up, which is often after the folks in their suits and in the room come up with the decision. Regular everyday people get together and say, we don't like this, we need to change this, we need to come together on a particular bill that will really, affect our daily lives. So we get together, organize around it, and, we may shut something down or whatever have you. And the issue is this, it's great because it brings us all together as community members, but the issue with this is there's not necessarily a long-term goal, and there's not that long-term community engagement, which I think his name was Lion had just brought up, right? Is how do you engage folks on a long-term goal, on a long-term timeline versus, first, one and done type of thing. And then, like Val just brought up, there is also the famous town hall meetings where, as a regular community member, you get to get up. What is it? I think they give you 3 minutes or something like that to say your spiel, say whether you're for or against something. And then the people who are on the panel or whatever have you, they will vote and decide on how they want to go. Will they take your advice into account? We're not sure, but that's the way it works, right? And the issue, like all of these have their place in, organizing and how things change and whatnot. But in terms of town hall meetings, it becomes difficult if you're not comfortable speaking out, or sometimes it's difficult when you do speak in public to be very clear and concise with your thoughts, things of that nature. And then there's also, like Val mentioned, there's the loud and the boisterous people, the people who have typical power, can be shut down or feel shut down, or they just close themselves off and they're no longer paying attention to what folks have to say, right? There's that. So what Everyday Democracy likes to do is talk about organizing in terms of using community dialogues, right? So whenever I talk about the work that we do, I like to put it into 3 main phases, right? We talk about organizing, then we talk about holding our dialogues, and then there's moving towards action. Right? And this is what the process would look like if we laid it down on paper. I always urge folks, and I want to be 100% clear, that doing community work, you all know as civic ambassadors, right? Doing community work is never as clear cut as 1, 2, 3. But I do like to give some sort of structure to whatever work is being done, right? So in the organizing phase, what Everyday Democracy likes to do is similar to like Rashad laid it out earlier, is first thing you want to do is set goals. What is it that you want to work towards? What is it that you're working after, right? And being very clear with that. And then with those goals in mind, when you have a small group of people who are willing to do the heavy lifting, Everyday Democracy does an organizing training with them. And there we talk about how to recruit people, the importance of using the racial equity lens, things of that nature. How many different teams are you going to need and subcommittees are you going to need on that organizing team? Because again, we need research, right? As Lion pointed out earlier, Rashad mentioned that during his presentation earlier too, is the importance of research. We also need to talk about how are we going to evaluate our own work? How do we justify a success, or what do we say is a loss, or what are lessons learned? Those type of things. And then we go out and we help people recruit participants and recruit facilitators for the community dialogues that we're going to be holding. And then we also hold the facilitator training for the prospective facilitators. And that's how we do the core bulk of our community organizing work. And then we end it all with what we call a kickoff meeting, which is to let the larger community know that we are going to be having these community dialogues on a particular issue. So now that we're having community dialogues on a particular issue, have a couple sign-up sheets or whatever have you there so people can sign up to come out and have a few different times or meetings that they would be able to show up and be a part of the community dialogues on whatever issue you'd like to have it. And I have this graph here in the middle. It sort of represents that you can have many different community dialogues going on at once, right? So when we're talking about doing community dialogues, we like to think of it in terms of, if you have a lot of resources, then you can support up, 10 or so, 15 dialogues going on simultaneously. If you are on a more modest budget, you may want to have community dialogues, just 1 or 2 going on at one time, right? Again, I am seeing the chat sort of being highlighted, but I won't be able to read it in real time if it's a long thing. So if you have a comment, just jump on in, or a question. Oh, Lion, yes.
What about the use of technology in these type of things? Like, Like when I do these type of projects and stuff, might use SurveyMonkey document files, and I might give the options for people to actually voice their concerns and stuff, and actually have a documentation, or actually have a graph or something that is substantiable when I make these claims. I think that's a more of an equitable and a fair way of approaching things, especially in COVID. Like a lot of people don't want to touch things and pens and stuff. And I think that by making it like email approach and stuff of that nature, or make it touchscreen approach, is more interactive on that level. Like those are some of the things I've seen with the use of technology when engaging in civic issues and things. What's your thoughts on that?
I do want to say thank you for bringing that up too, because the way I was just describing this right now was typical. I don't know why it's taking me so long to adjust, but I'm explaining this in pre-COVID terms, right? So yes, doing things, via Zoom, not necessarily in person anymore, because we haven't done anything in person in quite some time now. But yes, that's a very good point. So all you're doing is pretty much thinking of how you want to engage folks. What I've been doing over the last year is thinking of what the goal is in whatever interaction I want to have with the folks, and how can I then transition that into doing something online, whether it be Zoom for folks who can use Zoom, or what is that other one, meetings that folks use. Sometimes it's a chat on your cell phone, right? There's WhatsApp, there's different types of apps or group chats that you can use on that to stay engaged with folks and invite folks in to conversations and certain issues or certain initiatives happening. So those are some of the things that I have used. I know there's a ton of them now, right? There's totally a lot more options for us to be using online. But thank you for raising that up too. When I am generally speaking about the process that we use, it's typically from the realm of in-person meetings, etc. But we have been changing a lot of this, right? Like I have a slide later on about what the typical community dialogue looks like. Now it looks different because we're on a screen. I see another question or comment that came in through the chat. You can just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm in and out. That's why I can't sometimes speak. But the issue, my name is Doris Maldonado, and the concern that I've seen for my communities with disabilities and without is the technology furthers a divide. Especially during COVID times, we've seen a great impact. Some of our people with lower income or homeless or are youth in care, so they don't have the bandwidth, the connection, the education on how to even access some of these conferencing opportunities. Even with telehealth, my organization is running telehealth education, free webinars, but how do we access those people that don't have the access? The state funded phones also had a limitation. They had for almost a year unlimited time with the state funded phones, but now they were brought back in about last June. So there are barriers everywhere. So technology is not always a go-to, and we've seen that especially during COVID.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for raising that point too, because I know a lot of the work that I've done has been within cities. So in terms of, certain people not being able to have access to the internet or not having Wi-Fi, whatever have you, one of the things that has happened is I didn't know this before COVID at all, but so forgive me if I don't know enough about it to answer any questions, but there are certain like buses or whatever have you, where if you drive it on a certain block, like everyone on that block will have access to that Wi-Fi, right? Yes. See, I didn't even know what it was called. Thank you.
Right,
so
and there's a problem with that as well, because so many people are trying to get to those hotspots and trying to access it. I don't know if anyone remembers the dial-up from decades ago, but that's how it seems in those phones and with our people trying to access that. Everyone's saying, go to the local Dunkin' Donuts. That's not even feasible, and especially in the winter, a lot of our people suffered because of that. They couldn't make the telehealth visits, and it was really disparaging. We're hoping now with the opening up more, the community centers, the faith-based organizations, that is definitely out there and affordable, but not typically.
Okay, thank you for raising that. What I do want to do is sort of revisit that in a little bit, because I do want to hear more and hear from other folks too about ideas on, how can we address that, right? Because that is something, again, I'm a city guy. So when folks bring up, issues from rural areas, I'm not always on the cusp, or I'm not always right there to understand or even provide the best feedback possible. So that's why I appreciate us working in a group like this, where we're able to throw ideas around. And I see a hand again, Lion.
Yeah, I wanted to, what I mean by the use of technology, like some of the things, you can use a flip phone to respond to some of the things that are being presented, or also tap in onto the conversation. So when people use the limitation of technology, they might not know how to use the technology per se, or something of that sort. But I look at it as that it comes up to the ultimate of the choice if you have time or not, and if you want to make the time for this situation. Especially in COVID-19 right now, a lot of people are on restriction, and it's coming down to like a lot of people are not even working. A good majority of people. So it comes down, if you want to make the time and the sacrifice to actually want to move ahead. And I think that some people, you need to present that to them. And I'm a little bit more of a go-getter in my community, and I've seen how technology has worked in positive ways to get things done. I just think that there's a little bit more pushback on it because people are more held accountable with technology. You can actually count the score with an individual on what they're doing and where people are actually signing on to. Like that's where I think that there's the drawback where there's the accountability phase that's even that people will see. Like if even before you even bring up to like legislation or anything like that, what is the thoughts of the community? What their thoughts and feelings might be on this? And you have like a small, I say a small spreadsheet or small data understanding of what might be going on. And like some of it could be based upon if you're going up to the visual person face to face and you can input the data yourself. So it comes to how motivated you are and if you want to get the job done or not. So like when people say that technology is a barrier, it's only a barrier unless you make it a barrier.
Well, that's not necessarily, it's like if they make it a barrier, because again, at least with this example in terms of rural areas, I have seen many a times where, with Everyday Democracy, I'm able to do workshops and trainings over Zoom or online or whatever have you. And per usual, I think in fact with, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but she wasn't able to actually, have a video on and speak at the same time, whereas typically that's what we would ask people to do. So sometimes technology can be a barrier. So what we have to do is, like to your point, what I think you're getting at, Lion, is saying that how do we address those obstacles? How do we work around those things in order to still get the input from?
Yeah, and also, but majority of people have multimedia purpose phones. So when I hear, it might be an older demographic, maybe that's not being accessed as much, and there might be alternative ways that you might be able to get their input. But to say that, to just say that technology is just not useful and just throw it out the window, I don't think that's the right way when we have Bitcoin and we have other things that's going on. And our neighborhoods certain neighborhoods, like I'm from a Black and brown community. So when people say it might be a little rural, whatever, but the thing is, we need to have access to technology. We need to be exposed to these type of things. And I feel that people that are like saying that we're shouldn't have access to it is only going to hurt us in the long run. That's the reason why I'm pushing the technological aspect a little bit more, especially when I see the automation of jobs and other things of that nature.
Yeah, and I just want to keep in point too that no matter what, like it may be the wording of technology being a barrier, but the fact of the matter is if you don't have access to certain types of technology for whatever reason, then that would be a barrier. Say if I would like to do an online dialogue, right? Or this event right now that we're into, right? If someone is in the area where they're not able to actually access the Zoom link and then access the video or have their audio go over the airwaves, that I think is the barrier that we're actually addressing. It's not necessarily that technology is a barrier, but when you don't have access to the technology being used, right? So I think there's a differentiation that we need to be clear about. But I do see a couple of other comments coming in through the chat. Okay, I'm just seeing yes, access. Okay, keen. All right, so I will keep going and keep the comments and questions coming in, please. I appreciate it. So one of the things that Everyday Democracy likes to do, once we have the dialogues, and we'll talk a bit about the dialogues in the next couple of slides, is we break it up in terms of the 6 session dialogues. So when we're doing this, we're doing continuous community engagement. And to Lion's point, right, it is about getting input from the community members, right? So the first couple of sessions we have in dialogues, remember we have typical 4 to 6 sessions. The first couple of sessions are just about relationship building. Who are you? What brings you to our community? What brings you to this community meeting, et cetera? Those type of things, and getting to know one another as people first, right? Because one of the things that we had, I'm sorry, I cannot remember your name, who had mentioned it when we first began, is how do you see issues addressed in your neighborhood or in your community? When we mentioned social media and how sometimes social media is somebody getting on the platform and using it in a way to, criticize someone or put someone down. And I think, and we've all probably seen a lot of the negativity that can happen on whether it be Facebook or Twitter or whatever have you. And I think a lot of times that happens because we're not seeing each other as people in that moment, right? So what we like to do with our dialogue process is make sure that we humanize one another, and no matter what our political disagreements are or whatever have you, but we're able to have a conversation with one another, get to know one another as people first. And then in session 3 and session 4, we talk about the social issue that we really want to address. Introduce that data that was brought up earlier, right? What are the demographics? What are the important issues that are facing our community specifically, right? Because there are certain trends that happen nationally, certain trends that happen regionally, and certain trends that happen locally, right? So what does that information and data look like? And having a conversation around that. And then during the last couple of sessions, what we want to do is really have a conversation about brainstorming what can we do as a community to address this issue. And as you see on the right-hand side of the diagram here, it's what can we do as individuals, right? So there's a little individual change that happens by being a part of a community dialogue. There's collective action that can come from being a part of community dialogue. And then there's institutional and policy change, right? And I'm going to keep referring to Rashad's presentation earlier, where he talked about using those small wins to work towards a long-term goal, right? And that's what we think of in terms of doing individual change and collective action, which leads to community change, is those things, use those as building blocks to get to that institutional and policy change. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Again, jumping on questions, comments, etc. In terms of organizing, we want to build a coalition, and this comes from, this helps with resources, right? Who are the people and who are the organizations that are able to donate time, money, spaces, etc., things of that nature. And then you want to take time to recruit your participants and your facilitators, and then make sure that you train your facilitators in community dialogues. You don't want to have people having these small group conversations, which can really get heated because a lot of times there's different opinions on any political issue or any social issue. So you want to have people who are trained to navigate that type of conversation. And when we talk about training facilitators, what Everyday Democracy likes to do is think about neutral facilitation, where the facilitator, his or herself, themselves do not take sides. They're not necessarily a part of the conversation, but they make sure that the conversation maintains focus and that everyone's perspective is heard and respected. So in that way, we can take notes during the community dialogues and take those notes to make them actually move towards action, right? So any action idea that comes from us as a group, it is literally coming from us as a group because it encompasses everything that we discussed in session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4. Lion? Wait, should I keep calling you Lion? I just want to make sure I'm not being disrespectful.
No. Lion Roland. It's an acronym. I'm a Lions Club member from the London Lions Club, so it's not a big deal. It's all good. The thing that I want to bring up, it was 2 things I wanted to bring up. It was about, one of them was about coalitions. It's kind of hard, depending on what demographic you're a part of, to build a coalition with somebody when you cannot hold the other parties accountable per se within the demographics of that coalition. So that's like,
I'm sorry, could you explain that a little bit?
Meaning that, like, for example, like if you're building coalitions with different groups of people, the people that are part of the party, you have to hold them accountable within that group. What if they don't want to do what's what's best for the group or what the group agreed upon. So where are the repercussions of that? And those are some of the backlashes about bringing on board coalitions. When I hear that word getting tossed around per se, I have nothing wrong with it. And also the big thing comes with like a drawback with coalitions is like when it's a minority, it normally takes the absence of Black men. They normally put in the spaces of other demographics, and sometimes they even throw a white man into a minority position. So they over and steering the conversation. So it's no longer the people that were disenfranchised. It's the people that are basically, one would say, oppressing us or oppressing the individuals. So like when you have those type of things that go on with a coalition, how effective is it? Then the other thing I want to bring up is when you bring up the saying that all perspectives should be heard, some people will like beg strongly to differ, especially if somebody had like very racially charged behavior and language. I really think that like democracy now and certain organizations should take more of an active stance when people are saying things that are disrupting the harmony of society. I think that we as organization leaders should take more of an active stance. I've seen when other organizations have not done that, and it hurt their membership, it hurt their credibility, and it hurt their morality. So, like, what would you say to things like that, if you mind me asking respectfully?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing two comments.
It was two comments.
The first one, yeah. So the first one about coalition and responsibility. And to that, I say that's being very clear about the goals that you set when you first get going, right? And saying, these are the things that we're looking for. This is the things that we're looking at for. And part of what I want to do with you all later is thinking about who would you want to reach out to help support your work, right? So once you know what your goals are and you know who it is that you want to support your work, when you go to them, be 100% clear into what it is that you are expecting from them and making sure that they're 100% clear on what it is that you are going to be doing. So then that way there doesn't leave any space for misinterpretation, right? Or space for someone to be lacking, because if someone is lacking, then you can, revisit the conversation or whatever have you, and, even ask them, hey, you said you wanted to do this, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, whatever. We noticed you haven't been able to. Is this still something that you're interested in doing? If not, it's okay, no hard feelings, but just having something being very clear in terms of what is expected from me and what is expected from you. That, to me, I think is the best way to get at that lack of responsibility that can happen. Because, like you're bringing up, what I've seen before is people will get on the coalition to be on it, but then when it comes time to, we need people to actually give time, to give resources, et cetera, to, a movement or a project, then it's crickets, right? But if when you're joining the coalition, and it's very clear that by being a part of this coalition, these are some of the things that we're asking you to donate, then there's no space for miscommunication, or it's you can't say, I didn't know, right? So that's what I would say to that. And in terms of all perspectives being heard, right, that is an excellent point. And I do think that is something that not just the Everyday Democracy, but any organization, whatever have you, that focuses on doing community dialogues, we do have to be very clear about egregious statements or what's the word, or something that is very, very racist and inherently racist or inherently homophobic or transphobic or whatever have you, right? But at the same time, we would be disingenuous if we pretended as if those ideas were not out in the community, right? And that's why I cannot stress enough why session 1 and 2 are so important on relationship building. But hold on real quick.
My thing is to give them the latitude or platform to speak those things. Is that appropriate? The thing is, these conversations like that have been detrimental in those type of spaces and have threatened marginalized certain groups. So by creating that environment, by allowing them to speak, how beneficial is that?
Well, when we talk about allowing them to speak, right, are we talking about, so I'm going to get to these slides in a little bit, but if we're talking about there's 10 people in a community dialogue and you have one person or maybe even 2 people who are speaking this way, right? They are still in a room with 8 other people who may not agree with them. So that's what we're about. When you put together a community dialogue, you want some sort of diversity. So then that way, what you don't get is someone who gets on the platform and then begins to speak out on certain things that are, hateful or hurtful or super offensive or things like that. And also, because I'm running through it really quickly, so I wasn't able to address this, but being very clear that we do set group agreements in these community dialogues, similar to the group agreements that we had in the first breakout session here, where it's making sure that we are respectful, right? Everybody gets their fair hearing. Nobody speaks for another person. If we're going to be discussing something, then we're going to be discussing an idea or a topic. We are not going to be attacking people personally, those type of things. So if you set the context and the tone for your community dialogue with those group agreements, it's very much less likely where you'll have somebody coming in there being, very blatantly racist or very blatantly homo or transphobic or very misogynistic and things like that. Sometimes and then we also have a group agreement in terms of an oops and ouch moment, where it's sometimes a person is not able to express themselves in a way that would be socially acceptable. And as a participant in the group, you can say, ouch, because the way that you said that really doesn't work. That really doesn't work for me. And I understand how that could be hurtful. And then that person being able to explain themselves in a way where they are not trying to cause harm. So I am moving through this very quickly, but I'm happy you are raising these points, because it's very important to be clear that when we talk about community dialogues, we're not just talking about, sort of how Val was talking about how issues can come up during a town hall meeting, where now it becomes a free-for-all, right? But we are setting very clear group agreements with one another. And when we're having that conversation, we all are there for a particular reason, because we want to get to move somewhere together in unity as a community, if that makes sense. But again, thank you for the comments and questions. Those super appreciated. Anyone else want to jump in, please do, because I love the conversation. So this is what a typical community dialogue would look like pre-COVID in person. We write down our notes on chart paper. Nowadays, when we do them, people are using like Google Docs or things like that to keep a track of all the notes. 10 to 12 participants meeting up to 6 times. And again, we want to have diverse participants and opinions in the room, right? And not just racially diverse, diverse by gender identity, et cetera, all of those good things. So in that way, whatever ideas come from the community dialogue, they're representative of the diversity within the community. I see a comment coming through. I can't read it. It looks very long. So if you want to jump in, that would be cool. And just share your thoughts.
Well,
And,
yeah, it's just that,
yes.
Just to address, you mentioned, of course, the facilitator, the ground rules. That's important. And of course, for these dialogues, you don't have just people talking to each other at will, like, a free-for-all. You have trained facilitators who are skilled and knowledgeable on how to manage offensive statements, racist statements. But the important thing to mention also is that these dialogues happen with a discussion guide, that the facilitators are the ones asking the questions and offering people the opportunity to express their opinion, and having the opportunity for those who object to a comment that someone else might make to put them, to express their opinion. If they feel like they want to put them in their place, the facilitator will make sure that there's no disrespect on any side. It's all about creating a space that is respectful as much as possible. And of course, if a person becomes disruptive, the facilitators are trained to know how to deal with that.
Definitely. Thank you for bringing that up, Val. Thank you. Because I am moving through this very quickly, I think I have like a little bit more than an hour there. So I was very selective in which slides I put together and whatnot. So I appreciate certainly things need to be expounded upon. And then by the time we get to action, after we have our 6 sessions of dialogue, at the 6th session, people will come up with action ideas, and they vote at the action forum saying, these are the action ideas we want to move forward on. And then doing the action planning training saying, if we have 3 action ideas, these are the people we need to connect to. These are the things we need to do to make this a reality, and then break it into an action team and making that happen, right? And it all takes planning and implementation. Because, it's like that Malcolm X, I think you had the quote, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. All right, and let's see another comment coming through. All right. So what some of the reasons why this approach works is because we believe in including many different voices, and it helps build relationships. You know, when we talk about community organizing works, it is all about relationships. We find when we invite people to come to events or things of that nature, it's because of the person who invited them to come. It's all about relationships, all about who you're connecting to, how you're connecting with them, and it helps build communities, build capacity, right? When we do our trainings with community folks, we don't just do organizing training and do the organizing for them. We show them the tools and tips and techniques, and in that way they're able to do it on their own. The same thing with facilitator training, and the same thing with the action planning training. So in that way, community members are able to take upon the work that they would like to carry on. And then we do focus on racial equity explicitly, but not exclusively. And being very clear about this sort of is one of the things that mitigates racial issues that can come up during the community dialogue that Lion had mentioned earlier. Certain egregious statements. I won't take too much time on this slide because it seems like everybody here is very familiar with equity. It's been a term that's been used a lot. But one of the reasons why I do still use this old school racial equity explanation slide, because I know this one has been used a whole lot, is because I do find myself working with people, or at least initially working with people who have no clue what equity is. So this is sort of like that 101 slide to show people what equity is and what it means, right? Some people, it's been superly overused, and there are other ones. Some results that come from dialogues are, open space for people to talk about difficult issues. Like was mentioned earlier, social media may not be the most welcoming, warming place, but with our group agreements, dialogues are able to be that space. We're able to hear community members who usually don't have a voice, the people who are not necessarily comfortable speaking at town hall meetings, et cetera, and diffusing tensions between groups, right? So to Lion's point, sometimes people may come in with opposing political viewpoints or social viewpoints, whatever have you. And because there isn't a safe space for people to have those outside of our community dialogues, or there's very few safe places you can have them, this is the place where we can hash out ideas and get to know one another better while we do it. Without being disrespectful. And we are coming up with the ideas as individual community members working together as a collective, right? And that's very important.
I have an odd question, respectfully. It's regard to what if the people don't want nothing to deal with the leaders that are currently in power, and they organize themselves to get their own leaders? How could one that's observing some of these things that are going on help with that process?
In terms, when you say help with that process, being help raising,
like help organize them. They might need help
from within the community.
Like, for example, like you might have a group of like 20 or 30 group of individuals that's saying, hey, we might not like this politician we might not have in office, but we might want to look for a candidate on our own that's going to represent our views per se. This is all hypothetical. Mm-hmm. Is that something that Democracy Now! Would actually help to support, because that is something organic and from the community?
Well, everyday democracy doesn't necessarily, help people choose political leaders. We don't consider ourselves, a right or left, organization, whatever. But
but
what we have,
what I mean is like organize like the process for them. Actually, like how to set up a candidate screening. I think that's something that Democracy Now! Should be able to help, because that is neutral. How to help them enroll the candidacy process. That's something neutral that they can help out with people that are very interested. Those are the things that I'm more or less pointing out that are neutral, that I've seen Democracy Now! Have presented. Is that something I haven't seen it been presented like locally here, but nationally, but I'm aware of?
Yeah. So what we do as an organization, what we would do is say if somebody goes through the process or someone's interested in becoming, a more formalized community leader, we're there to help coach them through the process as they do that. But that's not necessarily something that like we wouldn't put down on the website, like we provide coaching for, someone who wants to become a state legislator or representative or something like that. That is not necessarily what Everyday Democracy does for its regular routine work. But what we have seen happen though is, say there's an organizer who wants to be a more formalized leader or facilitator, or even someone who participated in a community dialogue and they want to become a more formal leader, whether it be running for an office or whatever have you. We have been there, to, maybe help them brainstorm along the way, walk with them through as they go through the process. That's a possibility though. So it's one of those things where we don't have a formalized process to do that work, but if someone is choosing to do that because we do offer community support services, that is not necessarily 100% outside of what we would be working on, if that makes sense.
I'm just saying from Missouri, what I've been seeing in my community and other communities around America, that might be something that you might want to invest into or have an interest in, because there's a lot of people that, I'm not being judgy or anything of that nature. They might not like what's going on, but they might not have the tool, the proper mentorship to go about going about that process. And who will want to go through the same process of the other people if they think that that process is wrong? So if they need help with designing something of that sort, that's something I think Democracy Now! Could help with the process of, based on their skill set and stuff. Am I correct?
Yes, definitely. And to that point, so say and Val just brought this up, so I'm so happy Val is here, right? Because this did not come to the forefront of my mind, is there are academies that do offer support for folks like that. Now, what Everyday Democracy can do, especially with our network with something like the Civic Ambassadors or our Anchor network, right, is figure out who is it that's in your area that's doing that type of work and connect you with those folks, right? Because generally speaking, the folks that are in our network are like-minded in terms of racial equity, in terms of organizing, grassroots, et cetera. So then that way, whoever we connect you with, not you personally, but whoever we connect folks with, they are actually, sort of similar minds. So then that way, you're going through that process with someone who is more trustworthy, if that makes sense. So I appreciate you, Val, for the assist there.
Thank you, Mr. Val.
Yes. So I did show the slide for the individual change and the collective action. And then lastly, just being very clear about institutional and policy change that can come from holding community dialogues, which some of them that we've seen are hiring practices, policies being more explicit as they address racial equity, increased community input because dialogues have become an embedded part of their community engagement work, and then budget changes based off of, action ideas from dialogues. So those are some of the core things that can come from our dialogue work. Before I move to the next piece, I did want to time check with Zoya because I knew I had around about an hour, but I'm not sure where I am now.
You're good, Sagacity. You've got until 4:45. Okay,
sweet. So for this next piece, I would like you all, we're about to get into small groups for about 15 minutes or so. Think of a project or an event or whatever have you that you're working on, some sort of initiative, right? Or it could be your regular work. And then think of at least one person in one organization that you would like to partner with, or someone who would you like to support your work. And write them down. It could be an individual, maybe you met them here today. It could be someone who's a state rep or a legislator or something like that. Or maybe it's a local business that you would like to, that you would like to donate to your work, any type of partnership, right? And then once you're in your small groups, speak to your groups and say, this is what I'm working on, and this is the person or organization that I want to work with, right? And then develop what we call a pitch for that person, right? So how do you invite that person, or how would you invite that organization to now support the work that you're going to be doing? And the way we do this, and this is part of what we go through one of the things we go through in our organizing training is you want to begin, and this goes to Line and I's, the conversation we're having beginning was when in terms of building your coalition is first explain what it is that you're doing, right? And then tell them what it is that you want to get out of this partnership, what it is that you want to get out of your project. And then why does it matter to that individual? What makes it important to them as an individual, and why is it important to their organization or group? And then be very clear about what you're asking them to do, right? Do you want them to show up financially? Do you want them to show up to a meeting? Do you want them to show up to an event? and then give them a way to contact you. So if you could do this within your small groups, like I said, take 5 or so minutes to do it on your own, and then workshop your ideas within your small group. And if I'm not sure if all of our moderators are still here to sort of guide folks through the process, that would be great. If not, you're all civic ambassadors. I trust you to be able to work this out. So we can do that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and try to debrief with one another for the last 10 minutes of our time together. Is
Right,
any
so
questions, comments? Yes.
Well, I just
President?
wanted to let people know we don't have moderators for this section of the agenda today, but as Cassidy mentioned, I trust you all. And so we'll stay in the big room for 5 minutes so that you can have the slide in front of you if you want to take notes on it or take a picture for later. And then we'll break you into groups so that you can have that discussion portion.
Yeah, and I'll also put links to 2 handouts we have on developing talking points and recruiting folks, so then that way you'll have them. So, all right. So I did just put the handout for developing talking points in the chat. So if you can click on that, there's the second page is where you'll see the write-up on, how do you develop the actual pitch. All right, so that's it right there. I just put it back in the chat for the talking points piece.
I'll put you in your groups now, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
Hey, Elizabeth, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. It's great seeing you. Oh, wow, I didn't even.
Yes, I was muted.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Good to see you.
She was in my group.
Yeah, I feel weird now. Like, I hate to take this moment to shout out all the people I haven't seen in so long.
I know,
I see Sandy Rodriguez in here. Like, oh,
right,
wow.
I know. I
Yo,
see
Cassidy, nice to see you.
Hi, Sandy.
You too, Val. I see you more often still, Val. But I haven't seen
Good to see
Cassidy
you.
in a long time.
Yeah, it's been a minute. So before we wrap up, I did want to give folks a chance for comments, questions, whatever have you. I apologize for the Google link with the restriction access, but I did want to make sure I give everyone at least something concrete that can be used. I think that's really important when coming to these type of things. So any comments, questions about talking points or doing the pitch or whatever have you when you're working with, trying to look for community partners to work with? Did you find the questions useful, the prompts useful to come up with your statement? All
I
right.
like the one thing that Danielle said in our group about the whole idea of collective impact. Sometimes we only think about, well, how does this affect me? But the thought of, what's the collective impact of what we're going to do, the project, whatever it might be, benefits the common good everywhere.
I think about Cassidy, I want to mention something that I learned recently that is about how we sort of come to these problems with a deficit mindset, where we think about what is missing, what are we lacking, and all of that. So you really need to sort of come at certain things from the opposite angle, which is what assets are there and who is really interested in making a difference. Because a lot of times our approach to change has always been sometimes, I guess, I would say grass tops, because if it's being led by certain people that have a different mindset than when it comes from a grassroots approach, right? If you have an issue, you want to be the person that resolves that. You don't want an outsider coming in and telling you what's right for you, how you should do things. So I think that thinking about resolving our community issues from a deficit mindset is very different from thinking about what assets do we have.
Definitely. And I super appreciate you way much more now than I did, as much. I super appreciate you anyway, but just the fact that you said that, which is a total lead into the other handout I wanted to send you all, which was asset mapping, which is, pretty much looking at your community from an asset-based viewpoint and then saying, who are the people, where are the places, where are the organizations that, can benefit me on whatever journey I'm on and what I'm trying to do. So then that way, those are the folks that you want to reach out to and partner with and develop a pitch for, inviting them in and to collaborate with one another. So again, I swear I did not pay Elizabeth any money to make that transition for me.
Right. Yeah, and think about like people that you don't traditionally ask to join those groups, right? Because we always think about like leaders and people that are the loudest and people that have some sort of power in their areas.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's another thing that I love about Everyday Democracy as well is it's recognizing the leadership skills of people who are not traditional leaders, right? Because we have seen it where someone has been a dialogue participant because they didn't want to be a community organizer. They didn't want to get involved in all that. But after they participate, then they say, I want to do some more. What else can I do? And then they'll go and be a trainer. Then they'll, be an organizer for the next round of dialogues or whatever have you. But meeting people where they are and let them grow at their own pace, definitely.
This is short.
So I didn't want to take any more of y'all time because I know where it's coming to a close. So I'll pass it back to Val.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sagacity. Let's give Sagacity.
Thank you for having me.
And
thank you all for hanging tough. This was a long day.
Long
So
day.
you all did it. Thank you.
You kept us really focused. So thank you, Sagacity. You're a great trainer. Absolutely great. Thank you so much. So we're going to close the summit. Let me make sure I don't forget my notes. I have a lot of people to thank. And so I hope that, you've had a chance to learn a great deal from each other and from the great speakers that we've had here today. Let me get out of this full screen. Okay. Obviously, we had really a fantastic racial equity panel that helped us understand, the systemic institutional roots of so many of the disparities that people of color, in fact, all of the disparities that people of color face in our communities, in the areas of housing, in the areas of criminal justice, and healthcare as well. And obviously, what was important in that is the intersectionality, the connection between those issues. And then, of course, the great advice, organizing strategies that we all need to pay attention to when we're working on these issues. We had a great keynote speaker, Rashad, who shared with us some of the great work he's done in Baltimore with youth and how he has used, of course, the arts as a way to mobilize youth, but also some of the basic principles and practices of organizing. He focused a lot on the issue organizing, right? Organizing around an issue, but many of these same principles apply to community organizing when you're working in neighborhoods to address specific issues in the neighborhood as well. So, and then of course, this great training with Sagacity that helped us understand the dialogue to change process as one way to engage your community in conversations on an issue. And from there, bring about, different levels of action and practice that focuses on organizing around that particular issue as well. And so one of the things that I always emphasize is that civic ambassadors really have so many options, so many ways that they can engage with communities and with each other. And the key is really about relationship building. That is a very important part of the work that we're doing as organizers and as civic leaders. So now I want to hear from any of you. What the call to action, what do you commit yourself to doing the rest of the year to bring about meaningful, equitable change in your community? Anyone who wants to share. What do you commit to doing the rest of the year to bring about meaningful, equitable change?
I'll go. I'm going to use my role on the Talenttown Council to ensure that I give space and voice to others who do not look like me, do not sound like me, who do not identify like me, so that their voices can be heard by our entire community.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
I'll go.
Ron? Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep on focusing, having a Black agenda. Definitely getting more Black membership into Lionism. Actually focus on some of the systemic issues when it comes to some of their policies, when it comes to recruitment and other things of that nature. there's a lot of things that do need to be worked on within some of these civic organizations because they weren't really built with Black people or other demographics in mind in America, but outwards they do. I think for them to maintain their global standing in America, they need to be focusing on other communities as well. I think that's a great task and burden task, but I think it's something that is honorable and definitely noteworthy. So I'll keep focused on that.
That is great, Roland. I admire you because I actually used to be a Lion with the Trinity College Lions Club. I was one of the co-founders many years ago. So I really respect and admire the work of the Lions Club. And one thing that I really like what you said is that we all can be gatekeepers. We can all bring our perspective of racial justice and equity into organizations that maybe are hungry for having someone who can sort of inform them and their thinking about how to reach out to communities of color and also how to be part of addressing the challenges that communities of color face. So we can actually, and let's not think of ourselves as tokens. Let's think of ourselves as agents of change and changing those mindsets and changing those ways of thinking and the practices that go along with that. Anyone else?
I'm just gonna, although I recognize the intersectionality of 8,000 different issues, I'm going to try and focus on one and actually get something done. And so it will be the pollinators and the environment.
Thank you so much. That's Shani. Shani?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Shani.
I will join Shani in talking about the environmental impact of many, many things. And I forget if it was you, Shani, that said, focus on one thing. I'm having trouble with that. Got my hand in a few too many pots, but I am working with the League of Women Voters on the environmental impact of the plastics, especially with the bottle bill and the resistance that's coming from many places. And we have to keep working on that. And we still have Hartford votes to work on too. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much.
I commit to teach children mindfulness, and this is with partnership with student. He graduated recently from the Primordial Meditation with Deepak Chopra, and we are committed to teach 1,000 children, and so we're going to be doing that to give them support at these times. And so it's going to be all over the United States, maybe other countries. So hopefully it's more than 1,000, maybe 1 million children.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have time for one more.
Well, for my job, I'll be helping to close the health equity gap, which is what I am doing and really enjoying it. And then in some of the other pots that I stir, along with several others here on the call, continuing to try to increase voter engagement in the city of Hartford, educating voters, and then also in my hometown of Farmington, serving on the advisory council to understand where the needs are in our community and be able to really deep dive and find those needs and be able to fund solutions for those needs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sandy. It's good to see you, by the way. Thanks. So thank you all. I mean, these are all inspirational goals for continuing to advance, the civic work and bringing racial equity and racial justice, as an important piece of that work. And for continuing your leadership and doing this great community organizing work that you've been doing for all these years as civic ambassadors. So as we close this summit, again, I hope you gained a lot of new information and new learning. I'm going to ask you for a big favor. In the chat room, in the chat room, you will see now a link that will take you to a survey. And we please, while I'm giving these closing remarks, take a couple of minutes to click on that link and start filling out the survey as you listen to my closing remarks. It will only take a couple of minutes and will help us really gauge what you learned from the summit and how we can make it better the next time around. So I do want to thank all of the speakers, the opening speaker, Secretary Merrill, who is very busy, and Martha McCoy of Everyday Democracy. Also, I want to thank our panel moderator, Professor Bilal Sekou, and the panelists, Melvin, Robbie, and Michelle. And also our keynote speaker, Rashad Hawkins, and our trainer, Matthew Sagacity Walker. I also want to thank our small group discussion moderators, Richard, Aileen, Sneha, Cameron, Soya, and Lauren. And again, I want to thank the members of the summit planning team. I mentioned their names earlier today. And also I want to thank my colleagues at Everyday Democracy, Zoya, Elena, Naisha, Agnes, Jamil, Sagacity, and Lauren for their many contributions to make this event possible. And of course, again, I want to thank the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving and Connecticut Humanities and its funding partners for supporting the summit. I want to mention that the League of Women Voters of Connecticut is sponsoring a very important panel on legislative redistricting in Connecticut. As you know, the census, the US Census happened last year. That information is going to be used by the state legislature in Connecticut to determine how to delineate or create the districts, right? The congressional districts in the House of Representatives. It's important that you have your voice heard, that you learn about this process, because it determines, you know, how these districts, these congressional districts are demarcated or marked. So this event is happening next Thursday, April 29 at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And we have added the registration link into the chat room. Please participate. Again, April 29th at 7 p.m. And I now want to introduce my esteemed colleague, UConn graduate intern at Everyday Democracy, and herself, a Connecticut Civic Ambassador, Ms. Zoya Ali, who will officiate the swearing in of all Connecticut Civic Ambassadors. Zoya.
Thank you, Val, and thank you, everyone. I'd like to formally invite you all to become Civic Ambassadors. It's a really great program, and it connects you with a lot of amazing resources and tools that can really help to enhance and support the great work that you're already doing. And I'd like to take a quick second to thank you all so much for coming and being engaged and bringing your A game. I mean, I was bouncing around a little bit in the small groups, and I just saw, you know, everyone was participating and providing great things to say. And sometimes those things can be hit and miss. So I really appreciate everyone making an effort and sticking through with us, because it's been a big, long day. But I hope that you found something of value and you learned a few things. So with all that being said, I would like to welcome our new Civic Ambassadors that have registered in the past year. This would be your first summit, and I'm so happy that I was able to spend it with you. I'm going to take a moment now to read through the oath. If you would like to unmute yourself and join me, I would appreciate and love the company. So here is the Civic Ambassador's Pledge. As a Civic Ambassador, I pledge to be a dedicated and engaged member of my community, who will uphold civic responsibility, respect for our democratic institutions, principles of social justice, and nonpartisan civic action that will improve my community. I further pledge to devote at least 1 hour a week to working with others across different opportunities for civic participation and engage as a contact in endeavors to strengthen Connecticut civic health. Lastly, Civic Ambassadors work with others as a way to be a super carrier, inspire others for the betterment of our state and
so I pledge on
Saturday, April 24th, 2021, be a Connecticut Civic Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Congratulations.
All right.
Apologies
Congratulations,
for the
everyone.
wrong date. Thank you so much.
Back in time.
Thank you. So it's been great, and we appreciate you joining us today, Saturday. Please remember to stay safe and continue the great work you're doing. We admire all of you. It's great to know that Connecticut's future is in great hands. So thank you for being part of this 2021 Connecticut Civic Ambassadors Summit.
Great.